Morning, everyone. Before I introduce our Lieutenant Governor, I want to thank Governor Lamont for proclaiming October 6th as Energy Efficiency Day in Connecticut. My name is Brenda Watson. I'm the Executive Director of Operation Fuel. Lieutenant Governor Susan Bysiewicz will be joining us this morning as well. I'd like to thank, there she is, she's already here. I'd like to acknowledge Commissioner Katie Dykes, who will be joining us a little bit later. I'd like to thank PURA Chair Marissa Gillette, Vice Chair Jack Bukowski, Commissioner Michael Karen, Representative Geraldo Reyes, who you will hear from soon, Representatives Mike Winkler, Hilda Santiago, and David Michel, who are also here with us today. I'd like to acknowledge the Operation Fuel Board of Directors and the staff at Operation Fuel. I must call out Dana Barcelos Allen, who our Operation Fuel Marketing and Development Director, who organized today's event. I'd like to also acknowledge our Policy Director, Gannon Long, who is moderating our first panel discussion. And I'd finally like to acknowledge Mayor Suzette DeBeetham Brown for proclaiming Energy Efficiency Day in the town of Bloomfield. I believe Bloomfield is the first and only town to do so. So special shout out to the town of Bloomfield, which happens to be my town. I want to thank our Lieutenant Governor for being here today. Many of you may already know that Operation Fuel was established as a heating program during the 1970s oil embargo by Governor Ella Grasso. It is indeed my pleasure to lead an organization with such a legacy. And many may not know that our Lieutenant Governor is also the author of Ella, a biography of Ella Grasso, Connecticut's 83rd governor. It is indeed my pleasure to introduce Lieutenant Governor Susan Bysiewicz. Please take it away.
Thank you so much, Brenda, and good morning. Thank you so much for letting me join you today on Operation Fuel Energy Efficiency Day. And I want to say thank you to Operation Fuel for the important work that you do and the resources that you provide to our communities. Operation Fuel ensures equitable access to energy by providing year-round energy assistance, promoting energy independence, and advocating for affordable energy. And as Brenda mentioned, 40 years ago, Ella Grasso helped create this temporary crisis intervention program to help Connecticut citizens who were struggling. And unfortunately, we continue to have great need all over our state for this important assistance. And so today there are thousands of families that stay warm in the winter or stay cool in the summer because of your help. Not having energy in your home is a major health and safety issue, and a home becomes more prone to fires in that situation, and residing in homes without energy makes people more likely to suffer from injury and illness. So we very much appreciate the work that you are doing. And I thank you for having me here today. I look forward always to the event that you have in front of the old State House with the ice blocks and sculpture. So I'm a little disappointed that we don't get to do that this year, but I thank you for everything that you're doing and look forward to continuing along with our Governor Ned Lamont to being a partner in this effort. And just want to give a shout out to some of my colleagues in the legislature, Gerry Reyes, Hilda Santiago, and others who are joining, and also shout out to our great DEEP Commissioner, Dykes, Brian Garcia, and all the distinguished panelists that you have today. Brenda, I hope it's a successful day, and thank you so much for the great work you're doing.
Thank you so much for that. I already believe it's a success just on the strength of the folks who are already logged in. And The folks who are logged in understand the importance of energy efficiency, and there are some who want to learn more about the importance of energy efficiency. So I applaud everyone that's taken the time out of their day to be with us today. Before I get started with my comments, I want to ask everyone a question to frame our discussion. The question is, what do you believe is the result of thoughtful planning, cooperation, and coordination? I'd like you to limit your answers to 4 or 5 words in the chat, and the team at Operation Fuel will capture them and share them in a word cloud that we will later display. So why is Operation Fuel an emergency energy assistance program bringing attention to National Energy Efficiency Day? There are 2 primary reasons. The first is, our organizational goal is to help our service population, which includes the most vulnerable, achieve energy savings. But more than that, our goal is to continue to shed light on the social and structural determinants of energy insecurity. Poverty and systemic racism affect health and status, and energy access in climate justice communities, a relatively new term that acknowledges the environmental conditions many low-income households live in. Second, in the course of doing our work, we listen to the experts, and there are lots of experts. Those experts range from the people that we serve, folks who apply for our grants. It includes members of different groups from who we work with, the Governor's Council on Climate Change, also known as the GC3, the Water Planning Council and its Advisory Council, our fuel banks, Energy Efficiency Solutions, Acadia Center, the American Council for Energy Efficient Economy, ACEEE, People's Action for Clean Energy, also known as PACE, Neighborhood Housing Services out of New Haven, NUAC, and many, many, many more. Experts have also included people who are no longer with us, like our past generational leaders like Ella Grasso and Sister Pat Kelly. Current leaders like Dr. Mark Mitchell, Leticia Colon de Jimenez, Dr. Laura Bozy, and new generation of leaders coming up, Senator Wazer. I can name about 100 more people and a dozen more organizations across the state who have and continue to guide us here at Operation Fuel. When we think about delivering our services, assisting those who might struggle to access energy in Connecticut, we realize that there is no one path to reducing energy burden or to mitigating climate change. And we must absolutely work together and listen to each other. So our goal for today's forum is to not only highlight the benefits of energy efficiency, but we also want to inspire you all to dig in and center the most vulnerable people in your work. To celebrate Energy Efficiency Day, we invited our guests to speak about the mismatch between energy needs and programs among the population that Operation Fuel serves, Connecticut residents with low and moderate incomes. They will also speak about the success of energy efficiency programs and the results of residential upgrades. So we hope that this information will benefit you, whether you're a service provider, a policymaker, an advocate, a Connecticut resident, whether you're involved in service delivery or not. If you're a professional, your work may include large-scale development, engineering, education, utility or water utility services, or community development. We believe that together we can close gaps in access that exist for low and moderate income households through innovation, planning, cooperation, and coordination. The purpose of our thought question posed to you earlier. So let's get started. I'll turn it over to Gannon Long. I hear the applause in the background, just on the strength of saying her name. Gannon Long is our Policy and Public Affairs Director at Operation Fuel, who will introduce our first panel of speakers. Take it away, Gannon.
Thank you so much, Brenda. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for that warm introduction. We're really grateful to be here with you all. It is such an honor to be part of the team at Operation Fuel. And I am a registered lobbyist, so I want to make a special point to thank the state legislators who are here today, Representatives Michelle, Santiago, and Winkler, and of course, our first panelist, Representative Reyes. So for the next hour or so, we have 3 dynamic energy efficiency experts who will join us to discuss their work in policy, finance, and operations. So first, State Representative Geraldo Reyes will discuss his legislative work and what comes next on environmental justice policy in Connecticut. Next, Marcus Smith of the Connecticut Housing and Finance Authority will discuss overcoming barriers in energy efficiency access. And finally, CEO Lorenzo Wyatt of Home Comfort Practice, an energy efficiency contractor, will discuss how consumers can access and benefit from energy efficiency upgrades and what the industry needs to thrive in Connecticut. And we're asking all three panelists to come together about an hour from now so that they can take your questions. Feel free to enter your questions in the chat or the Q&A as we go forward, and we'll do the best we can to get to them. As for you all, our wonderful audience, please think about the questions for the panelists, and we're going to ask you to keep three lenses in mind as we go through it. So as we see it, reliability, sustainability, and affordability are the three main components for energy efficiency. First, reliability. Is the energy we need available when we need it? Second, sustainability. Do we all have access to renewable clean energy sources? And third, affordability. Can all customers pay the cost? And do we all benefit from the investments? Finally, a reminder that this event is recorded. We will share the link afterward. And I want to just thank our media partners at CTN who are here broadcasting us live. The video will also be available there if you check out their incredible service online. You can follow Operation Fuel at Twitter, Facebook, Instagram at Operation Fuel. And if you want to tag your post today, we're going to ask you to use the hashtag OpFuelEEDay 2021, and we'll put that into the chat. All right, all that said, I'm thrilled to introduce our first panelist, a true leader in our state, State Representative Geraldo Reyes Jr. of the Connecticut General Assembly, representing the 75th Assembly District in Waterbury. Representative Reyes currently serves as Deputy Speaker of the House on the Environment Committee, and he's the 2021-22 chair to the Black and Puerto Rican Caucus at the Capitol. Representative Reyes, thank you to the welcome to the panel. Thank you for being here, and thank you for your work on behalf of our state.
Well, thank you, Ms. Gannon. Thank you very much for having me. And I'm thrilled and honored to be here, not only representing the great city of Waterbury, but the state of Connecticut and the many folks that I met on a national level on this very important topic that we're discussing here today. And I will make my introduction into the environmental injustice community as how it affected me and the constituents of the city of Waterbury. And when I went up to the legislature in 20, oh my God, I already forgot. It's already been 5 years, almost 6 years. I went up there with the thought process that I wanted to join the environmental committee, not because I was a subject matter expert, but because I have lived and seen what an abuse and what we were doing to our environment, our air, water, and land, and how it affected me in the south end of Waterbury. Waterbury is the second, by the state's own ranking, the second most distressed municipality when it comes to distressed municipalities. So, Waterbury being an old industrial town, we certainly have our share of poor air quality, abandoned fields and brownfields, high traffic, high pollution. So, you know, we're at the crossroad between New York and Boston. It's an important corridor of the state of Connecticut. And as I stated earlier, Waterbury being an old industrial town, we had the residual effects of an era gone by. So brownfields was one of my interests, and one of the main reasons why I got into the Environment Committee was basically to address the brownfield situation that as it was happening and developing in the city of Waterbury. And that said, Waterbury has done over the past 20 years a tremendous job in the brownfield arena. And I chose to go in there and continue that work. And that's one of my charges. But going back to environmental injustice, what piqued my curiosity here in Waterbury was an expansion of a transfer plant that was coming into the south end. And truth be told, we don't get a lot of folks that are actually environmentally charged. It's always a small group that leads it and then people start following. But this particular expansion in Waterbury actually united the entire city, where east, west, north, and south all joined those constituents from the south end that said, hey, no more, we have enough down here. And that's what I said. That's where I saw the power of unity, everybody getting together and rallying for the common cause. And it just sparked more of my desire to understand more about what's going on down there in the South End. And then I learned more about the state of Connecticut, the waterways. So it evolved for me from a simple problem here in the South End. And at the same time, prior to that, we had a raw sewage dumping into the Naugatuck River that went, I would say unnoticed, but undocumented or underreported for 14 days. And I forget how many millions of raw sewage went into that river. That led to the sewage bill that I worked on. One of the first bills I actually was able to get through the entire process. So I was really engaged, and I've met so many great environmental leaders. And I would be remiss if I didn't at least start by acknowledging the Dean of the House, Representative Mary Mashinsky, who is my mentor and my go-to person when it comes to all things environment. And her and I have formed a very good relationship and a partnership. And I really value her expertise. And since then, I've met so many other people, and I could go on and naming them. But I just wanted to give a background of where I'm coming from as a legislature, and also having spent 36 years in industry as a manufacturing engineer. So I have seen what the private sector, what manufacturing can do as it pollutes the air, as what it does to the waterways. So I have seen it from both ends, coming from a manufacturing world for 36 years. When I was a young kid here in Waterbury, School of Manufacturing, we believe was doing a great job coloring the rivers for us, pink, green, blue, and we as kids played in that water. We didn't know any better, to be honest with you. And you come to find out later, it's all contaminated water flowing down the Mad River into the Naugatuck and eventually into the Sound. So everything is related. I believe that the work that the Environment Committee does in Hartford is second to none. I think it's very, very important. And we talk about sustainability. We need to sustain the quality of life and improve on it here in the state of Connecticut. And that's a huge responsibility that's put on the Environment Committee, which I have the privilege of serving on under the direction of Senator Coleman and Joe Gresco. So I will leave it there, and I'll let you start with your questions.
That's great. I am curious, and I have a couple questions, but I'm tempted to ask you, when you said Waterbury has been doing a lot of great work in the past 20 years as far as environmental justice. Do you think that's coming from people getting together and uniting, or what do you think other municipalities maybe can? What makes you say that? What do you think other municipalities can be doing similar to Waterbury?
And when I say the past 20 years, again, to be clear, I'm talking about the brownfield remediation. We've had the privilege of having some great stakeholders here in Waterbury. And again, I'd be remiss if I don't acknowledge former Representative Jeff Berger, who did a tremendous job in getting the funding and getting involved with brownfield remediation. He did a good job during his term up there in Hartford. And I'm referencing to the brownfield remediation work that was done by Jeff Berger and the city of Waterbury mayors at those times. But I believe the environmental justice work, I believe that here in Waterbury, we still have ways to go.
Yeah. And I think that's probably true in a lot of communities around the state.
Mm-hmm.
So let me ask you, and thanks for framing this around environmental justice for us. I always learn when I hear you tell your story a little bit. So we know that you recently led and passed a notification bill through the legislature around different source of pollution coming into communities and the community being able to have a say about that. Where do you think, you mentioned talking to other folks from different parts of the country, where do you think Connecticut ranks as far as, climate justice issues today? And, what do you think is the progress that we've made since you've been in the legislature? And where do you think our state should be going next?
Great question, Gannon. So I'll start again where I left off with referencing Representative Mashinsky. I come from a corporate background, and the things can't happen fast enough for me in the legislature. I come from an arena where we order it done, it gets done, and in the legislature, it's a process that's very slow moving. And and I used my sewage bill right to know. I that bill passed on the very last night, honestly, somewhere in the 11 o'clock range, and I was sitting up in the Senate. In fact, I missed the vote in the House because I was sitting in the Senate, peering down from the top, hoping that my bill got called and that it passed. So, what I thought was, oh, this is going to be a very easy bill to pass through. What I learned about the process in the legislature is, my God, it's a huge team effort. It involves lawyers, it involves research analysts, it involves costs, OPM. It's amazing what it takes to get a bill through in the legislature, and it's not fast. And what I learned from Mary Mashinsky is that even if it's the best bill in the world, doesn't mean it may not pass on the very first attempt, second attempt, third attempt. And it's just as good in the fourth attempt as it would have been in the first attempt. But in the meantime, you lose X amount of years. So by my standards, I believe that everything is slow and we can't get to point B fast enough. By Mary Mashinsky's standard, who's slowed me down because, again, my background is different. She believes that what we've done there in the last 6 years has been nothing short of amazing. And she said there's been bills that she's been fighting for decades that have not passed, that have passed in the last 6 years. So I won't go by my reference because I think my reference is irrelevant here. I'll go by the deans of the House reference that believes that the state of Connecticut has done great work on the Environment Committee, moving bills that have been stuck in queue or just couldn't get negotiated past the hurdle. And you know, you asked me about Connecticut, and I as I said, I am not the subject matter on that, expert on that, but I believe that Connecticut has done a great job, and I think that we're at the forefront. I don't believe that we're the leader. I believe that we're in the hunt.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, and certainly Representative Mashinsky's opinion counts for a lot. I mean, she's seen a lot, and she's somebody who she walks the walk, she bikes the bike, right? She takes the train to the Capitol. I mean, she's really committed. Why do you think energy efficiency and, you know, thinking about the just kind of the energy or the savings, money savings, improving airflow and health inside the home, opportunities for workforce development, what do you think makes energy efficiency? Why is it so important for your constituents?
You know, that's a great question. You know, we start with a simple home energy audit. Many people, when they do this, they're amazed at what they find out on these home energy audits. And everybody believes they have an airtight, great quality home, and that the air conditioning and the heating is not leaking by. But when they get the audit and they get the findings, it's eye-opening. And I think that for those of us who have not done the audit, that's the first step. And I believe that we need to make energy affordable for the least of us. And that's why I believe wholeheartedly in Operation Fuel. We have a great branch. We have a great operation here in Waterbury under the now. And it serves many of my constituents. And I will also disclose that when we were very poor and my mother spoke about El Abrazo, we also benefit from those early days of assistance. So it goes back quite a few decades for the Reyes family, and the beauty of those programs is that what we were able to benefit from as young children, myself and my siblings are all able to pay back now and pay it forward. So very, very important. I think, you know, you talked about air quality. Asthma rates down here are not that good in the Waterbury corridor. You know, I believe wholeheartedly that there's a lot of work to be done in that arena, but we do want to make sure that the energy efficiency for all is the end goal for the state of Connecticut.
Absolutely. And thank you for sharing that personal history. That's something that, you know, I think a lot of us would agree. You've done a lot of paying that forward, as you said. So thanks for sharing that. I want to ask, what could the legislature and other policymakers do? Maybe these are things you're working on with Rep. Mashinsky, Winkler, Santiago, Michelle, and others, what could the legislature do to accelerate energy efficiency work and growing the energy efficiency industry in our state? And I guess I could also mention at this point, we're grateful to Governor Lamont and Deep, the legislature. We had an incredible coalition with their new coalition, CCAG, Sierra Club, and others, that we passed. The legislature passed a bill. Senator Lopes was the champion in this in the Senate on retrofits for affordable housing. So this is going to be, there's going to be more funding dedicated towards making these improvements in people's homes. So as the agencies are rolling out that program, what do you think the legislature can be doing to promote the industry and to be getting more energy efficiency upgrades into homes across Connecticut, particularly for the most vulnerable people?
To me, again, and first of all, it starts with education, and it continues on with a good coordinated marketing scheme. I believe that there are so many programs that are underutilized right now, and it's simply because people do not know. Number one. Number two, there are folks that do reside in our state that are undocumented, that are afraid to come out of the shadows and even ask for these services. And as far as the legislature is concerned, it's an ongoing battle, as you know. There's always bills that are in the hopper that are going to be coming out, especially in the short session. And I want to take a minute to compliment and thank a colleague of mine who I value his work and his opinion, and he's on the call. He's on the forum right now, and it's Representative Michelle. I find him to be all things environmental justice. That's how I view Mr. Representative Michelle, and I value his work and his opinion. And I find him to be as passionate a person when it comes to all things energy efficiency. And if I know him, and I know many of my colleagues that are on this forum, and some that are not, Representative Miko, Gresco, these are folks that are on the excuse me, I'm getting a call, on the Environment Committee, who have had these conversations and will continue to champion energy efficiency for all going forward.
Awesome. And I totally agree with you about Rep. Michelle. He also has a great sense of humor, which I'm sure makes those long nights at the Capitol go a little easier for you and your colleagues. I don't see questions in the chat from the audience. I'm going to give folks a chance if you want to ask a question for Representative Reyes. We still have another minute or two before we bring Marcus Smith out. So if folks have a question, please chat it in. And Representative Reyes, it's been wonderful to talk to you. I hope you'll be able to stick around for about 40 minutes and take questions with all the panelists at the end. Do you have any thoughts that you just want to share with us before?
I do, Gannon. Thank you very much. I'm honored and privileged to be on this forum, and I think that this is extremely important work. And I just wanted to reference on House Bill 5002, which was not only, interestingly enough, was not only obviously done work that was done in the legislature, but included some municipality folks, and there was great input on how we can get this done with the municipality here in the city of Waterbury, including Mayor O'Leary. So I would actually like to also thank him for his work, and he understands it. He gets it on the municipality level. What we're trying to do on a state level. So, it's a partnership, and I just wanted to make that reference known that he gets it. The municipalities have a stake in this as well. And it is our job all collectively to enhance the city, states, and our nation from an energy standpoint.
That's great. And I have I'm actually, the more that you talk about it, so I'm really, I feel like I should be spending more time in Waterbury, get to know the city a little bit better. We do have a question from Denise Savageau, who's one of our panelists on the water panel, coming up in a little bit. Is there legislation that didn't pass this year that you see as a priority for next session as far as the energy or environmental arenas?
In the environmental justice arena, the work is not completed. There's a led by Senator Cohen, Representative Mashinsky, and Representative Michelle, myself, other folks that are on the forum. We want a more robust environmental justice bill. We want to be the standard for the entire nation. So that work is not done, and will continue.
Great. Thank you so much, Representative Reyes. It's been an honor to talk to you, and we'll hope to see you soon. Thanks so much for being here and sharing your story today.
Gannon, thank you for having me, and you have an open invitation to join me for lunch and water, baby. We'd love to have the conversation here.
I will take you up on that. I will take you up on
ma'am.
that. I'm going to check the bus schedules. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
So our next panelist is Marcus Smith. He's the Director of Research, Marketing, and Outreach at the Connecticut Housing and Finance Authority, or CHFA. CHFA works to provide low and moderate income residents in Connecticut a range of choices where they can live in affordable, safe, quality housing located in environmentally sustainable and economically healthy communities. Marcus has an MBA from UConn, still an aspiration for me working on it. And he was previously with the Healthy Homes Lead Remediation Program, which does barrier remediation in partnership with CCMC. Marcus Smith, welcome. Thank you for being here and sharing your knowledge today.
Great, thanks, Gannon, and thanks, Brenda, and the entire Operation Fuel team for the opportunity to participate. I'm excited to hear more of the conversation.
Awesome. So we'll dive right in. We know that all ratepayers in Connecticut contribute to energy efficiency funds in our state. These are overseen by the Energy Efficiency Board. They're managed by the investor-owned utilities who develop a plan every 3 years for how to use them. However, about 20 to 30% of customers seeking energy efficiency upgrades in their homes can't access the services because of barriers such as asbestos, mold, lead, vermin that need to be addressed first. So from the perspective of affordable housing and finance, why is energy efficiency such a good investment?
Great, thanks, Gannon. Yeah, and I would actually, I mean, it's not necessarily a barrier per se, but I would add lead to that list of kind of home-based toxins that really make our work really hard, right? And kind of bring a lot of focus to these issues. And so I think from the financing perspective first, I've seen a bit, so this is my 20th year in housing, which is insane to think about, but I've seen over the time, and especially in the last 10 years, kind of a rapid shift in how we kind of put these large scale multifamily properties together, how we make those development deals work. And so, when I first started out, there was probably one or two pieces of financing that you would need, a lot of kind of public subsidy coming in, and off you go, and you're done with it, kind of putting the financing together. And now it's, we're talking about, 6, 8, sometimes 10 or more different layers of financing to make these things work. And so it really does shift. It allows for kind of a diverse, integration of different financing tools that are out there. And I think that's where energy comes in. I see is there the kind of the unique and innovative ways that the energy folks are thinking about how to bring dollars to the table to make those renovations or new construction projects really come together. And I'm actually seeing also, I work for a lender, right? From our perspective, it helps kind of shift the risk, a little bit, so that, and hopefully I'm not getting too technical here with folks, but I think for a large degree of that is just, we don't have to, it's not 50% or 80% of our money going into a project. It's more like 20%, and other resources are coming in to kind of help make these things work. And so from that perspective, just from a strictly financial perspective, that's really helpful, from the benefit of these energy efficiency tools coming in. From a management perspective, again, it's kind of all about is the system properly sized and designed, installed, and maintained? But I think it can help reduce utility costs, and especially for properties with owner paid utilities like electricity and water in some cases. And then I think most personally, maybe even more importantly, from the resident perspective, it can help, reduce the pull on their budget. We all know that, especially in lower income households, some folks in Connecticut are spending 40, 50, sometimes more than that, percent of their household income on rent, and then another 20, 25% on utilities. Doesn't leave a whole lot for healthy, nutritious foods, transportation to get to and from work, healthcare. There's other costs that kind of get shifted and put aside in order to pay for the roof over their heads and keeping the lights on and the heat on. So energy efficiency absolutely, and maybe obviously helps kind of bring those things, make those things more evident. But I think, even outside of that, the home, an energy efficient building, if it's done right, is a stable building, right? It operates properly, it's clean, and it can have a kind of a reverberating effect within the community. So a stable housing stability is critical, not only just within the home to make sure that you have a consistent, clean, stable, quality home, roof over your head and four walls, but it also has, stability in the kind of the community sense is really important to focus on as well. And so, I mean, that's at that 20, 30, 50 unit perspective, right? I mean, the practitioners on the call in the room understand that when you're talking about lots of units, if you're loading up lots of units into a property, it's kind of easy. It's easier to make the numbers work, right? It's easier to achieve that, energy efficiency that does have those reverberating effects. But I think the challenge that a lot of us are facing at the community level is that a lot of folks, especially lower income folks, rely on those smaller rental properties, right? Either the single family home that they're renting, or the 2 or 3 unit properties that they're renting, or in Hartford, the Perfect Six is a kind of a classic rental property that you're seeing across the neighborhoods. Really hard to kind of use those same energy efficiency tools that we talked about a second ago. It's really hard to take those same, to leverage those resources into something at that scale. So I think that's kind of maybe where we have an opportunity for improvement, right? To think about how we kind of meet all the needs of all properties, really, and all residents within those properties.
Yeah.
And I think sorry, go ahead, Gannon. Yeah.
No, and in many cases that housing stock is also older. One of the things that we've noticed or kind of learned, I guess, is that there's a direct relationship between somebody's ability to pay their utility bill and their ability to keep their home or to move into a new home. And that's something that we've worked on as well at Operation Fuel. But particularly important, I'm sure you'd agree, for communities where for decades, banks have not invested money in those properties. Landowners have not upgraded, or done proper ventilation, remediated barriers like lead or other, asbestos or others. So it's especially important that we increase those investments now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, getting creative with resources, especially at that, the small landlord, mom and pop landlord level. There are resources like you mentioned. I used to work for the Healthy Homes program at Connecticut Children's. I mean, that's a great example of kind of a statewide resource that I think is underutilized. I mean, Connecticut Children's is, from a branding perspective, is one of the most well-known names in the state, but a lot of folks don't realize that they're eligible for and have access to, a wealth of resources, whether it's asbestos remediation or lead remediation, addressing issues like mold, kind of those barriers, like you mentioned, that do help. If you kind of address those, you do open up doors to energy efficiency. And so I have a poll question. I know we queued up. So if you're thinking about, the biggest area of unmet need for energy efficiency in Connecticut, I talked about like the different types of properties that we have in Connecticut. Where do folks see on the call? Where do folks see that place that we should probably, if we had to focus, if we had to pick kind of a bucket to look at first, where do folks see the biggest area of unmet need?
I'm going to put my answer, but I'm not going to tell people what it is. If folks see that full question, please enter your answer there. So let me ask you this, Marcus, and I think you've touched on it a little bit, but what are some individual, community, and system-wide recommendations for how we can increase access to healthy and clean and reliable energy, especially for Connecticut residents who are in the low and moderate income brackets?
Yeah, I think so. I spent about 3 years in kind of the healthcare space, right? So I was in housing for a while and then shifted and then came back to housing. So, but in that time in healthcare, I was introduced to this concept of a community health needs assessment, right? So for those who don't know, the Affordable Care Act required that nonprofit hospitals and healthcare institutions conduct what's called a community health needs assessment to understand the needs of their community from a health perspective. And I think it depends on how the institution goes at it, but I think Connecticut Children's has a great approach. And that mindset of understanding that health isn't just isn't just a medical problem, and it doesn't just sit squarely within like the traditional doctors and nurses and hospitals and clinics. It goes beyond that, right? So thinking about the intersectionality of health with things like education, transportation, job growth, and then housing and energy. I think that the healthcare system is really getting that, and I don't want to overstate it. I think that some are doing it better than others, and I think there's still a lot of work to be done. But from a system level, I do think that's kind of an interesting perspective to take, and I don't see a lot of that happening. Maybe not in a structural sense from the housing and energy side. I think bits and pieces here. I think some folks are trying it. From the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority perspective, we have what's called a qualified allocation plan, and every year or two we have to put together this plan of how we're going to put out one of our most valued resources, which is the low-income housing tax credit, right? So as part of that conversation, we usually reach out to different stakeholders, get some feedback, put the plan together, and this is kind of historically how we've done it. Put the plan together, our board approves it, and it sits for a year or so. But I wasn't involved in it. It just kind of happened while I was, before I came back to CHFA. But I think my colleagues, Seema Milani and Chuck Emerson, who I know a lot of folks know, made sure that there was a kind of a robust energy conversation around that planning. And so bringing in folks from different, from the energy and sustainability side of things to get an understanding of where are we missing, where are the gaps in this plan, where are we missing opportunities. And one of the biggest things that we learned was, a lot of energy investment really works well for new construction, say, but it doesn't really work well for renovation and rehab. So how do we address that, right? So we spent a lot of years, and I know folks who are really in the industry knowing that, this concept of passive house, and kind of really airtight design that focuses on indoor air quality has been a huge focus of kind of like front on the cutting edge innovative design folks, architectural folks. So we spent a lot of time maybe 5 or 6 years ago figuring out how we can intertwine, how we can work passive house methodologies into our allocation. But now we're realizing that there's a huge number of housing types within Connecticut that just can't meet that level of design. So what other solutions can we come up with? So I think kind of thinking about it from the holistic systematic perspective really helps. So I think that's
Absolutely. So I think this is actually a good time. You mentioned kind of the household budget and the needs, the basic needs, and how that can get out of hand very quickly on low income. I just want to mention a couple of resources folks may be interested in, which are on Operation Fuel's website in our reports section. So one is from Apprise, which was an energy affordability study we did in 2017. This kind of outlined what people are spending on their energy, what we call the energy burden, what they're spending on energy as a percentage of income. And we also followed that study up thanks to our partners at the Green Bank and at VEIC in 2020, where we issued a report accounting for housing, energy, and transportation burden. And those, especially for low-income communities around the state, we just found at the census tract level, those are just unaffordable costs. And as we think about transportation and how we're electrifying transportation over time, we also notice there's a direct relationship between housing costs and transportation costs. Because usually if you live in a certain place, you're spending more to get to other places or less to get to other places that you need to go. So I just refer folks to operationfuel.org, and then you can check out the reports section over there. I have a couple of more questions for you, Marcus, but our audience has some too, and they've done they're being so attentive. I want to recognize folks and thank you for sharing your questions. So one is, and this is something we think about a lot. I talk about kind of identifying different market segments of landlords rather than treating them all as a monolith. But how do you think we can incentivize landlords, property owners, in making their properties more efficient? And this maybe is for Representative Reyes later, but are there legislative answers?
Yeah, this is a tough one, right? The carrot stick balance. And we try to, to Representative Reyes's point, I think a lot of folks aren't aware of these resources. So for as many landlords that we think about as like those outliers who are just kind of like really not engaged with their tenants and really not looking out for their well-being. There are 10 property owners that we don't hear about, right, that are doing the right thing, and just don't know about the resources that are available in their community to make their properties more efficient and healthy. So I think that just raising awareness, whether that's through marketing or outreach or events like these, making sure that folks at the local level who have connections with residents can get information out. But the other side of it, that's the kind of the stressful side, right? The part that would give me fits with healthy homes is that you just have property owners who just aren't willing to take that next step, and they are acting kind of counterintuitively in the best interest of their residents. So I think it's that it's a kind of a local issue, but there must be some. I think I will say this. So, and I see that Bonnie Roswick is on the call, and this is a conversation that she and I had quite a bit. At what point do you get the lawyers involved? At what point do you kind of make this a legal issue? And I think a lot of medical professionals hesitate. Like for example, if they're screening for somebody and they say, well, they have asthma and it's related to their home. And they don't want to raise the red flag because they don't want to get that person potentially evicted from their home, right? And Representative Reyes said that there's a particular sensitivity around folks who might be undocumented. They absolutely don't want to run the risk of having that person deported or put in legal harm. So there's a hesitancy. But I think in talking to some folks, I think that it's either, hey, time's up, we do have to actually take action here. Or I think there's also this mentality that we might be over compensating for it. It is time to reach out to those local code enforcers and health officials and make sure that the right steps are taken.
Yeah, I'm actually kind of amazed, and I see a question from Jude that I think is kind of speaks to that as far as how folks getting involved. I'm a little bit amazed sitting here 50 minutes into this Zoom that we haven't mentioned the pandemic yet. Probably the first time that's happened to me in the last 2 years. But I want to ask you, as we're getting close to wrapping, in the wake of the pandemic, has there been anything that you expected to happen that didn't, or vice versa, around these healthy homes issues?
Yeah, so March 2020 hit, and with Healthy Homes, when I was there, our biggest concern was because we realized that homes make kids sick, right? That we knew that unhealthy homes can have a drastic impact on health outcomes. So with people being kind of locked up, metaphorically, kind of stay at home, don't go out. It's that the risk of people being overexposed to the toxins in their home. And then also a lot of families rely on those community partners, whether it's schools, churches, whatever, to be a to offer that support system, right? Or school nurses, helping to make sure kids take their asthma medication. And so if kids aren't going out to those places, are they gonna now have to turn to the emergency department in local hospitals to get that treatment, get that care? And I want to say this kind of like, it's not clear across the board, but in many cases, and we're finding that we didn't see that huge spike in asthma, asthma related admissions into the EDs. So it kind of makes us pause and say, well, what do we know about the impact of housing on health and the energy efficiency on health, right? So I wouldn't say that we kind of throw all the studies away and start from scratch, but I think it does kind of beg the question of like we were having an opportunity during the pandemic to kind of do some more research and insight and gather some insight from what's going on in the housing, energy, and health space. And this is one of those things that just kind of sticks out to me.
I want to ask, I think these are going to be I'm going to do something I sometimes do and twin my questions together. But I think these will be the last ones, and I'll give you a moment to just reflect. So I want to think about in our current setup, and I think your poll question got to this, who is left out in our state and what we can do to reach them. And I want to tie that also to Jude's question about a lot of the folks on this call, members of their own communities. What can community members do working with state actors or other, public-private entities, Chaffa, Department of Housing, other folks, what can community members do to further Connecticut's environmental justice work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think that the academic answer for me is, kind of like shifting the mindset from, so that's something that's more transactional to something that's more transformational, right? And I think that's what I mean by that is I think that we kind of fall into the trap of as we're putting deals together, or as we're kind of
what's going on?
Sorry, Guy, I think you're unmuted.
No, Guster's going to be here.
Guy, thank you.
Yeah, so we've kind of fallen the trap of, of kind of thinking about how do we make this deal work from the numbers side, right? Whether it's an engineering side from the energy efficiencies, or is it on the dollars and cents on the housing side? How do we make this thing work? And we don't necessarily look beyond kind of the four walls or the property line to get a sense of like, how can we make it work for the community? And so kind of shifting away from that transaction and something more transformational. How can we incorporate feedback from the community? And I'm it's something that I'm working on personally, but I think that we can all do better in kind of resisting the temptation to rely on those proxy organizations or those proxy partners as a shortcut, right? There are no shortcuts to this really, and it doesn't end. There is no end to it. It's kind of an infinite game of sorts, right? That we're all trying to do better for the communities that we serve, or we should be anyway. And there is no easy way to do that except to just kind of put in the work and making sure you're hearing from the community themselves, the residents themselves, the occupants of the homes, the other stakeholders in the community that have a stake in how our investments and our work are going and working. And I look at our colleagues over the Department of Housing and how they've had to roll out the rental assistance program during the pandemic and the challenges they've had. And I think they've done amazing work, right, of doing that, of kind of putting in the work, right? I talked to the program manager over there, and she said something like they did 400 Zoom calls in 6 weeks, in addition to in-person meetings where they could. That's a heavy lift, but that's the kind of thing that we need to be doing to make sure that people aren't being left out from the resources and the services that we have to offer.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's a great shout out as well to our friends at Unite CT and the Department of Housing, who are also offering utility assistance, we should say. So if you or somebody that is looking for extra assistance on your rent or utility bill, please reach out to them. And to your point about the outreach, I agree. They had a van that they are bringing around, and kind of, a truck that they're driving around to different communities and trying to enroll people right where they're at. I think it's a model that we can all look to for sure. Marcus Smith, we have more questions for you, but we're going to ask you to stick around for about 20 minutes, and hopefully we can get to those when we bring all of the panelists back. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your knowledge with us today.
Thanks, Gannon.
So we're going to move to our next panelist, our cleanup hitter, not to make too many baseball references this morning, but as the policy director, I approach these issues a lot on paper and in conversation with brilliant folks like you all here today. In that context, I'm really looking forward to speaking with our next panelist. He's on the ground, working with clients every day, working to make their homes safer and more efficient. Lorenzo Wyatt is the owner of Home Comfort Practice, an Energize CT authorized home improvement contractor who provides energy efficient construction solutions, including weatherization, energy audits, insulation, heat pumps, and more. Home Comfort Practice reduces residential energy demand by performing energy efficiency upgrades in Connecticut. And Lorenzo also serves on Operation Fuel's board of directors. We're so lucky to have him there. Lorenzo Wyatt, welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Gannon, Brenda, and the Operation Fuel team. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. Can you tell us a little bit more about Home Comfort Practice and the type of work that you do?
Sure. Well, Home Comfort Practice, as you said, is an energized Connecticut contractor. We've been in business since 2010. Over this time, we've served over 15,000. We've done over 15,000 energy audits, insulated over 6,000 homes, and completed over 500 window replacement jobs. Our audit crews perform comprehensive diagnostics of the energy consumption of a home. And during that appointment, we also do some improvements as well. It all begins with a health and safety assessment, just because there's all sorts of hazards, such as high carbon monoxide levels coming off heating systems and water heaters, There's asbestos. We mentioned that before, the barriers to weatherization, asbestos, mold. Knob and tube wiring is another, problem that we encounter a lot. So we first have to check for those so that we know that we can proceed with the work. And in the process, we educate customers about their homes. Do they have those hazards? And, we don't want them to live with them. And I'm sure they don't want to live with them all either. So, we bring that to their attention, and we also come up with plans for getting those things remediated to the extent that the funding's available, which is another problem that we have run into. After we make sure it's safe to proceed with work, then we get into advanced air sealing. And that whole goal there is to try to reduce the amount of uncontrolled random air leakage coming into the home and out of the home, because you can spend a lot of money trying to condition air, trying to condition the environment. But if you have the air, moving out, air coming in and air moving out, well, you're losing all your conditioned air and you're losing your comfort, and you're wasting money. So that becomes one of the first targets for us. And then there's duct sealing. If people heat their homes with forced air, well, if those ducts are leaky, that air that's conditioned in the system, whether it's heated or cooled, is not going to get to its intended location. So we spend time to seal up, duct work to make sure that the air gets where it needs to be. Again, that's another source of energy loss as well. We do lighting. We upgrade to LED lighting. We also use sink and faucet aerators to reduce the amount of hot water that's used, also shower heads. And then finally, I think probably the most exciting part of it is after all this diagnostic process and after really getting to know the home and also how the customer uses the home, we make comprehensive recommendations on how to upgrade the home. And that includes additional air sealing. It includes insulation. It includes window replacement. And of course, it includes HVAC systems. All these systems together, they contribute to the health and the comfort of the families. But then by maximizing the efficiency of these systems, it reduces the amount of fossil fuels that are burned in order to keep the family comfortable, but also the amount of pollution that's created as a result. So, I mean, in a nutshell, that's what we do. Through the HESIE program, many of these upgrades are actually, covered to the extent like insulation by and large is covered 100%. Window replacement is not, it's subject to a copay. Heating systems could be covered 100% depending on the household situation. So we try to get as many, families, households in need into this program so that we can serve them, so we can upgrade their homes, and we can make their lives better.
Yeah. And I think I got a question from a member from Iris Kaminsky previously that I think you're well positioned to answer here. Can a renter have their apartment audited for energy efficiency or only the property owner?
Oh, absolutely. We serve renters and homeowners.
Okay, super. So let me ask you a little bit about your customers. You mentioned the HESIE program. I'm sure a lot of folks are familiar with that. Some may not be. It stands for Home Energy Solutions Income Eligible, I believe, and that's the state's energy efficiency program for lower income residents. What type of customers do you work with, and how do you reach your target audiences?
Okay. Well, first of all, home comfort practice works throughout the entire state of Connecticut. I think I have a web guy who's working on a special little website graphic for me. I think there's only maybe like 6 to 8 towns that we haven't served yet. So I'm going to make sure we get there. We work throughout the entire state. We specialize in 1 to 4 family homes. That's our sweet spot. And of course, it's for both renters and homeowners. Most of our customers are income eligible, actually, meaning that those households earn less than 60% of the state median income, and those families are served through the HESIE program. I believe this is true, is that Home Comfort Practice is the largest HESIE contractor in Connecticut, and that would be by audit, installation, window upgrade, production, and possibly by our capacity to serve as well as our employees. And how do we reach them? That is, I'm going to tell you this. I probably shouldn't say this, but it's like a secret sauce kind of question. Back in 2012, we were growing our HES business, but also our HES IE business. And we had this hurdle, is that, you know, HES IE is an amazing program. To the most part, the audit's free of charge. Installation's typically free of charge, as I explained before. It all sounds too good to be true. And actually, in fact, a lot of the Energize Connecticut programs sound too good to be true. Or why am I getting all of this? And it's a long explanation to try to make people understand that they're paying a small charge on their bill and things like that. So what we found is that the best way to get people to participate in these programs and overcome these hurdles of skepticism is to have word of mouth. And so what we did was we created something called the Community Outreach Program. We call them CORE. We hired these individuals from our community. They're actually customers. And they just love the program because we delivered the service to them. They liked what they saw and they thought that they could sell the service. And so we ended up hiring, at one point we got up to 10, almost 15 community outreach representatives, but they're in the community. They work in their own communities. When we complete an audit and, you know, hope to God we make the customer happy and we deliver the full breadth of the programs, and we really do a comprehensive job of upgrading their homes and making them feel more comfortable, they tell their friends, they tell their families, they tell everybody, because they got something really good. And so we've leveraged our community outreach representative program. We also have leveraged our referral programs. And as a result, you know, we've grown grown a lot.
That's fantastic. I love that model that you're describing. And you're really focused on somebody who's a believer, who understands the benefits of it. You're bringing them in, right? But those are really the best messengers. And we find that, you know, we work with the Public Utilities Regulatory Authority and the utilities a lot. And what we find is that sometimes if the utilities want to share a message, people are sometimes reluctant to hear that, kind of just as you described. It's like, it's too good to be true. There's a trust factor. And so having that messenger that really connects with the person that you're trying to reach, that's such a crucial aspect of this work. So I appreciate you sharing that with us. And I imagine some folks are probably taking notes as you're talking. But it is complicated. And I guess for somebody if somebody's reaching out, or if somebody's interested in improving the health, comfort, and clean air in their home, can they reach out to you directly? Do they need to go onto do they need to do some research first? Or how does that work for somebody who's just kind of starting from scratch?
Well, of course, I always encourage people to go to www.homecomfortpractice.com. They can also call us at 203-450-3000, of course. But actually, the Energize Connecticut website is great. The Operation Fuel website is great. There's lots of resources out there whereby people can be channeled into the program. So I think that's the first thing. And if people reach out to us, the first thing we do is we get them qualified, whether it's for the standard HES program or HES IE, and that's based on income, of course. Once we get them qualified, then we get them scheduled. We get them scheduled, and then we start the whole process as described before, with starting off assessing their home and make sure that we can safely upgrade their homes.
Great. And I know it's also something as people are inviting you into their home, that trust factor really is crucial. But it's so good to know that there's not a lot of steps. They can just call directly, and then you're going to connect them with the incentives that are out there. So the energy audits themselves, we have Karen Duff-Lyons, community health worker, asking, what is the cost for energy audits for renters and homeowners?
Well, if they are not income eligible, meaning that that their household earns more than 60% of the state median income, then the current cost for an energy audit is $50. That's the cost of the copay, which it's reasonable. But the benefits that they get, I mean, even just doing an audit, we on average right now at this time, the average audit results in about $1,350 worth of value in terms of air sealing, in terms of duct sealing, in terms of lighting, hot water saving measures, and that's just for the audit itself. So, in that way, there's a lot of value just in the audit. But then when you tap into the benefits, the incentives, whether it's the $1.70 per square foot for insulation, whether it's $100 per window if you upgrade to a triple pane window. And the incentives for heating systems vary depending on the system, so it's hard to get into that. But there's just so much value in spending that $50 to, one, just learn more about your home and how much fuel or how much energy your home is consuming now. Also, how much fuel and your home is wasting now, and then getting a comprehensive plan on how to reduce that. I mean, there's a lot of value there.
Yeah, that does seem like a low number, and I'm so impressed by your command of the savings. But right there, $50 to save $1,000 a year, pretty good investment. It's also something that, you know, different organizations or foundations might think about covering the cost of that for people if they are slightly above that 60% income range. You know, if you had a grant that for $5,000, you could do, right, you know, however many audits, that 100 audits, and folks, and really target it that way. So that's something to think about from the finance side. It's a small investment that can generate big savings for people who really need that the most. I'm going to ask you, I'm so grateful for your description of sort of how it works in the home. We have a few more questions in the chat about that, and we'll continue getting to those. But I want to shift towards the industry a little bit for a moment, and just thinking about the energy efficiency industry in Connecticut. One of the first people that comes to mind for me, and probably for you and other folks here, is our colleague Leticia Colon de Mejias. I just want to acknowledge Leticia and her work at Energy Efficiency Solutions and Efficiency for All, recently recruiting 10 energy efficiency workers to go through a training program. Within a few weeks, they're all employed doing this work. So I just want to take a moment to congratulate Leticia and her team, as well as those folks who are just starting out in the industry, for your leadership and just for your work in developing this. It's an industry that's saving costs for folks. It's creating jobs. It's reducing greenhouse gas emissions, all important things. So if we can just take a moment to say thank you to Leticia for your leadership. And in that frame, Lorenzo, can you tell us more? And it sounds like, you know, your business has been able to grow. I know a few years ago, the legislature took some of that funding away. And so that was a tough time to sort of stop and then have to restart. But what are some measures that would help you grow your business? And what should we be doing to ramp up the growth in Connecticut's energy efficiency industry?
Okay. So before I go into that, I do want to just say that in many ways, there has been great support and leadership from our state in really promoting energy efficiency. And you mentioned that no one's talked about the pandemic. I think we have to talk about that when it comes to our industry. Big shout out goes to Deputy Commissioner Victoria Hackett, Commissioner Katie Dykes, and just the overall Lamont administration, Eversource and Avangrid, for really bringing together the stakeholders when our industry got shut down. I mean, we go into people's homes, and when everything got shut down, we didn't work for 3 months. And so during that period, we all came together and we figured out how we were going to get folks back to work safely. And it was a lot of work. But I have to tell you, between creating the incentives to make comprehensive, home upgrades more affordable for low-income families, as well as for the market rate customers, all the things that were done were so effective that, it really set the stage for a really strong end to 2020. But 2021 has been phenomenal. We entered the pandemic shutdown with 83 employees. We have 93 employees today. Actually 97 today. The investments in time, and I can only speak for our particular company. For Hess and Hess IE audits in 2020, we did 2,335 audits. And as of today, we're on track to do 3,246 audits in 2021. Insulation upgrades, we did 863 in 2020. We're on track to do 1,481. That's a 72% increase. And then window installs, we did 131 in 2020, but we're on track to do 262. So that's almost 100% growth. So the growth has been great, but that you really have to give credit to Deep and the Lamont administration for really setting the stage, and in the utilities as well, for really setting the stage for growth and success. Now the challenge is, and as you mentioned, Letitia, there's so much demand that we're trying to keep up. And at one point we were booked out almost 3 months in terms of serving customers, and that goes for audits only. When it comes to insulation, we have 12 insulation crews, but they're booked out until February. Window crews, we have 3 of those. They're booked out until January. I mean, everything's really booked out. So we really have an opportunity to hire and to grow within this industry. And some of the work that Letitia's done, you mentioned, Efficiency for All, they brought in and they trained, and they did. I mean, the training was excellent, top notch. I think they all came out with almost 4 BPI certifications: the building analyst, the envelope, healthy homes, and there might have been one more. But those trainees and certified technicians are now working in the industry. I have one working for me. He's excellent. He's great. He comes down from Hartford every day to Stratford, which I feel bad for him, but he's like, look, I got a job and I love what I do. So, it's really great. But yeah, I think all these things that were done really made it so that now we're serving more customers. We're reducing energy demand, and we're improving health and safety outcomes, a lot more than we were before, but more importantly, we're creating jobs. So it's, you got to say that government's really effective sometimes, and this is one of those cases. What could be done? You mentioned the raids. That's another one that is so disruptive. During those times, we ended up having to cut staff significantly. We had to serve fewer customers. Essentially, we were rationing, the amount of people we could serve. That was not good for the industry at all. That really slowed things down. So if we could avoid that, that would be great. And then, they could increase the overall budget for HES and HES-IE. Frankly, HES, I think, is around 20 million. I think HES-IE is around 22 million. It would be great if they were, bigger. HES-IE specifically, could it go to 30 to 35 million? That would be great. We could do a lot more. Those are, a few things. Let's see, is there anything else? No, I think those are, that's about it.
Well, I think that gets to Brenda's question in the beginning too, is planning, coordinating together, everybody getting on the same page, and then planning longer term, knowing next year's allocation is good, but also increasing that over time and saying, we can plan for that. We can predict that in a couple of years, we're going to have an extra allocation, or we're going to focus on a particular community or a particular region of the state. And that allows us to spend our resources more efficiently in the end. Definitely something to pay attention to. I know the Energy Efficiency Board, just for folks that have a background, the Energy Efficiency Board oversees the $700 million 3-year plan that all of us pay for on our electric bill. We have a small fee that goes into that money, into that fund. It's managed by the utilities in conjunction with contractors like Lorenzo and Leticia and others. And that board approves the updates to that plan each year. So I know this year there were a lot of folks involved in that public hearing process. I think it's always great to see people engaged. And hopefully that's, we can continue working together to provide the resources for this industry to keep growing. Lorenzo, this has been so enlightening. We do have more questions. We have about another 15 or 20 minutes before we take a break. We're planning to do that around 10:35, and then we'll take a 10-minute break, and then we're going to hear from Commissioner Dykes on the second half of the day. So I want to ask at this point for Marcus Smith and Representative Reyes, if you're still with us, to please join us again. And I'm going to look through the chat and see a couple of questions that folks have asked. Lorenzo, I think this one will be for you. It's from our partner and fellow U Chicago graduate, Melissa Copps. All my schools represented today. I'm just waiting for somebody from Hartford High. But she says, Lorenzo, I'm wondering if there's any evaluation of the moisture profile of the building envelope before adding insulation. Is that part of what you do or part of the program? And then she says, adding insulation can create moisture issues if it's not evaluated for the renovated thermal and moisture profile. I should also say Melissa's part of the Green Building Council, and she really knows her stuff about these issues. So hopefully that's not I don't know if that's a stumping question or not, but hopefully not. I see your smile, maybe it isn't.
Yeah, well, it's definitely a technical question. Yeah, so as a part of the whole BPI kind of home as a system process, our auditors actually do a walk around, looking for penetrations in around windows, rot around windows, making sure that the gutters are carrying water away from the home, looking at the grading around the foundation of the home, just to make sure that there's not standing water, because again, that could cause moisture problems in the basement. Looking at the roofs to make sure that the roofs aren't leaking, is another issue, so that we don't have water in the attic. I think the other thing is really evaluating it. It's funny you say the relative humidity, really evaluating how moist the air in the home is. Do they have good ventilation in the home? And then the whole process of air sealing the attic floor. Because what you're absolutely right is that when you have cases where there's high humidity inside the home and you have lots of penetrations across the attic floor, now you can have that moisture being pushed up into the attic, and then typically in the wintertime specifically is condensing on the roof deck and causing water and moisture to fall down and causing water problems. So yes, that is a part of the process in making sure that it's safe to weatherize and insulate homes.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And I see we have a question about legislation that I'd like to direct towards Representative Reyes. Melissa, hope that answers your question. So this is from Karen Duff Lyons, and she says, is there any legislation for property owners to be mandated to complete an energy audit for their properties with a schedule to repair where needed? And I'll ask you that. I'll also just mention, and I should know, but I know the legislature has been working on a bill led by the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection and Commissioner Dykes and her team, but they've been working on a bill where when homes are sold, the previous owner would have to do an energy audit to be able to disclose this is the energy cost of this home, and that may have an impact in the real estate transaction. But in particular, right now, Rep. Reyes, is there legislation that landlords would have to be mandated to complete this energy audit? And what do you think about that? Is that something that the legislature is maybe considering?
Thank you again, and great question. As what's on the docket right now, especially in the short session, and no, we do not have any such bill that's going to mandate owners to do the energy audit. But I clearly support what the Commissioner Deep is trying to do, especially at the time of sale, which I think is the opportune time to actually make sure that the buyers and sellers know exactly what they're getting. So to answer her question directly, no, but that doesn't mean that it's off the table.
Great. So that's something that folks can look out for coming up in the future sessions. And just because I would also say this, a lot changes in politics. Just because something isn't on the schedule today doesn't mean it won't be later today. So keep your eyes out. I have a question, and this might be for Marcus or for Lorenzo. This is from Denise Savageau. How has the supply chain challenges from COVID impacted energy efficiency installations? Have you guys been dealing with challenges of the supply chain?
Lorenzo, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I'll take it. It's been pretty bad. We are waiting now 18 weeks for windows. Our window manufacturer is really a tough story. They, when the shutdown first hit, their folks were laid off. Well, I would say a significant number of their people stayed on unemployment. This is when the unemployment benefit was like $600 a week. Stayed on unemployment and then just didn't come back. So they've essentially had to retool and rebuild their workforce, and that's still causing some problems. But that happened throughout the entire industry. It's just hard to get product. Fiberglass insulation was short for months. Now there's supply, but the cost has gone up a lot. And so that's a big problem. And there's nothing we can do about it. And unfortunately, given the constraints of the program and the budget of the programs, it's not like they're increasing how much they pay us to install the insulation. So we're dealing with that. That's causing some problems for us as well. And then there's just supplies like in just general weatherization supply, door kits, foam and other things. It's short, but the bigger issue is it's just got really, really expensive. So that's how it's been affecting us. It has put a lot of jobs on, on hold or postponed for a period of time, specifically with windows and insulation. But you know what? It's the times we're living in, and we're scrambling, trying to do the best we can.
Yeah, I think that that ship that was stuck in the Suez Canal was really a metaphor for a lot, but also an omen of things to come. Unfortunately, it's crazy to think about how much that has been disrupted, and also how what happens today affects what happens months from now, and all of those. It's not isolated incidents. I want to throw this. I think this may also be for Lorenzo. So we have a question from Merle Paczynski. Some of the folks that we serve might benefit from training in energy efficiency jobs. Can you tell us more about the training programs, as the need for employment is great? Can you tell us about some opportunities?
Yes, I would tell you that you should certainly look up Efficiency for All and Leticia Colon de Mejias. And to get into that program, it's excellent. It really is one of the best training programs that I've seen. They really did a great job crafting it, and they did a brilliant job executing on it. And they produced some really, really strong certified technicians. So Efficiency for All, Leticia Colon de Mejias, and I think that would be where I would send you, because I foresee that program's only going to get better as our industry grows.
That's great, and that's a great. I think folks will find that'll just be the starting point. There will be a waterfall of information and access, I think, if you reach out to Leticia and her team. So it's a great place to start for folks looking for training and workforce development. Marcus, I want to ask you a question. You mentioned that you were with the Healthy Homes program at Connecticut Children's Medical Center, and I know still have a good relationship with the great folks over there. I want to ask you about the self-enrollment piece. Do you think it's how efficient it made the program? So one of the things that we've run into in energy assistance is Connecticut just changed it this year. Credit to the Department of Social Services for adjusting their plan during the pandemic. But as far as proving their income status, so previously, if you were seeking energy assistance from the state of Connecticut, you had to do an assets test and prove that you didn't have over a certain amount of money to be able to access that aid. Operation Fuel doesn't have an assets test. It was something that we found didn't serve our clients or our team or our fuel banks. But I just want to ask about how, when folks enroll, rather than have folks prove their income status, is it more efficient to just reach folks without that administrative burden? And can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we were fortunate enough. I think it was in 2018, the state legislature passed a bill that provided a lot of funding for through the State Department of Housing into Connecticut Children's Healthy Homes program. And as part of that, the innovative kind of approach we took to that funding source to operationalize that was adding a characteristic so that if a home is located in what's kind of characterized as a low or moderate income census tract, it automatically qualifies income wise, both on the property owner and as in tenants if it's a rental property. So so there is no requirement. I mean, there are kind of like IRS requirements, like so if a tenant is receiving a stipend to relocate, the IRS requires that Social Security or some sort of tax identification is collected in order to kind of as like a paperwork processing administrative thing. But in terms of like the paperwork upfront in order to qualify that home or that apartment as income eligible was completely dismissed. And I think the thought was there that it's a burden, right, for a lot of folks. And generally in Connecticut, unfortunately, a home that's located in a low-income census tract is going to be occupied by a low-income household across the board, right? There are very few exceptions to that. And if right now it's not occupied by a low-income household, by virtue of being in that community, if that household were to move, it's probably going to be rented back out to a household who's income constrained. So that was just one thing that we took on, and I know it's a barrier that not all programs can kind of remove, but it's something that I think so folks could look at if they can.
Yeah, absolutely. And Representative Reyes, you mentioned that Waterbury is described as the second most distressed community in Connecticut, it sounds like maybe there's more the legislature could do to sort of refer to that automatic qualification, reducing the administrative burden, but just recognizing the community health impacts that Marcus is talking about, where if your address is located in a particular census tract, chances are, that you also need those types of services that we're talking about today.
Excellent point, Gannon. And I know my census tracts pretty well. 3505 here in Waterbury is not only a tract with a enormous high unemployment rate, but the health status of that particular census tract is also not too healthy. And I referenced the 06706 zip code in Waterbury as one of the unhealthier areas, if you will, in the city of Waterbury. So yes, I support that. I agree with what you're saying and what Marcus has said, and it's to be considered. Absolutely.
That's great. I want to ask Lorenzo one more question about workforce development, and then I'm going to ask a question to all three of you. So Lorenzo, you mentioned Efficiency for All's training program. Are there particular gaps in the workforce development around energy efficiency, particularly audits, renewable energy? What do you see as the growth areas for that?
The whole field has potential for growth. I mean, we've seen it in our own business. But I think the biggest challenge is promoting this energy efficiency industry as a viable industry, and one that high school graduates and college graduates should get into. And I think that's something that certainly I think Letitia's working on, but I think we could all do that. And I think the more we educate the marketplace about this particular training program, but also about our industry and the viability of the industry and the wages and the earnings that people are bringing home and the improvements that they're able to make to their lives as a result of working in this industry, I think that's going to make it a lot easier to recruit and to develop. That's been one of the other challenges, is recruiting, because it's just not, I mean, you hear about being a plumber, you hear about being an electrician, you hear about being all sorts of jobs, but you don't hear about being an energy efficiency technician or a window installer or an insulator. You don't hear about it. And I think the more we do to educate the marketplace, I think that's going to be the key to growth.
Absolutely. Education, always part of it. I have one more question as we're getting close to wrapping, and I'm going to ask each of you to answer it from your lens. So, Representative Reyes, you can think about it from the perspective of policy or the legislature. And Marcus probably thinks about it from the perspective of financing and coming up with that stack that you were talking about, the 8 to 10 layers of how to make a project viable financially. And of course, Lorenzo, you're the operational expert. So I'll ask you in that order. But what do you think, Marcus's poll question came back, folks may have seen. The majority of people identified 1 to 4 multifamily units as the most challenging to get attention around this area. So from that policy perspective, Rep. Reyes, what do you think, why do you think that is? What could we be doing to reach folks in those 1 to 4 units a little bit better? How could we make that work a little better?
This comes back to, again, a great question. This comes back to the piece that I keep saying, that these are the harder to reach population. These are the same people that we couldn't get to fill the census. These are the same people that we couldn't get, that we don't seem to getting engaged civically. And I believe that these folks need to be treated a little bit differently, and the approach has to be differently. These communities, whether they're undocumented, whether they don't speak English as a second language, or just don't have the economic intelligence, that there are opportunities out there to actually better everything for their families and themselves. And I see it as the outreach needs to be targeted into specific neighborhoods in their native language, strong and often. And it, to me, that explains that chart. That's Waterbury. 1 to 3, 1 to 4 family rental properties, that track could be very well be Waterbury. And you know, it's engaging those that I believe are disengaged for whatever reason, and that challenge is one that I greatly take very serious and go after personally. And I think it's going to take a personal involvement from those district leaders and with the help of their certain agencies.
Absolutely. Thank you for that.
Mhm.
Great points. Marcus, what do you think? What are some of the ways that we can get more attention towards 1 to 4 family units?
Yeah, so I think it's probably a little late in the game to get into redlining and racial segregation and systemic racism, but I think that's why we're currently dealing with that, right? I think, and we're all kind of waking up to that slowly in our own way. But I think what the fact that there is no surprise that the fact that the type of housing stock that's still dealing with the burden of unhealthy and inefficient housing and affordability is all this. It's that type of housing stock, and it goes back 100 years as to the root cause. But in terms of like how do we solve that, I think what we're doing right now in kind of local settings is experimenting with those integrated approaches, whether it's a health, housing, and energy that like groups like Building for Health are working on with LISC and Connecticut Children's and others. From the CHFA's perspective and from DOH perspective, it's coming up with that innovative and creative financing that's appealing and accessible to multiple homeowners and property owners, realizing that large scale tax credits, that 8 to 10 financing stack, it just isn't viable at that level. So what are some of those? Is it a home buyer program where that people can actually also get a grant to make those home improvements so that when they move in, they've got a stable, safe, quality house that's energy efficient? So I think it's a lot of work to be done there, in realizing that we have the resources at our disposal. It's just kind of aligning them and connecting the dots.
That's great. Thank you. And Lorenzo, the smart people always give their board member the last word, I think, here. So Lorenzo, let me ask you, as the operational expert, are 1 to 4 unit homes more challenging operationally? And what can we do to get more attention to folks who live in these spaces?
They are. We've done pretty well with word of mouth, but we've served a lot of people, and it gets a little harder. As each incremental unit, it gets harder to find more people. So that is a challenge. But I think Marcus hit the nail on the head in a lot of ways when he said that doing it by census tract in terms of qualifying people for these services, but then also by identifying those tracts, knowing that the people would automatically qualify so that we can upgrade the housing stock. I mean, people come and go, people move around, but ultimately we want to upgrade the housing stock. So if we had a better plan, and I do believe, I've spoken with Larry Rush at Avangrid, I do believe that Avangrid has a plan where they've already mapped out the housing stock and they've had it set up by census tract. And at that point, if they just kind of lay it out where it is, I'll send the people to get every single unit in those areas weatherized and insulated, and we'll make it really, really efficient. So I mean, I think that would be a silver bullet in many ways to reaching the 1 to 4 family households.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that so much. And I know that you're not afraid to knock those doors, as well as Representative Reyes. Thank you so much to all of our panelists. This has been so enlightening. I want to move us along in the day. We're so grateful to you being here and sharing your thoughts and your knowledge with us. As we're wrapping up, I'm just going to leave you with a few questions. If folks, we're going to take a break for about 8 minutes. If folks can just put your answers in the chat and we'll take it back, but we're going to meet back here at 10:45 with Commissioner Dykes. So the first is, when you're thinking about the challenges around climate and economic justice in Connecticut, what keeps you up at night? What sticks with you most from today's panel on energy efficiency? And how can you apply information from our experts today to your daily work? So I'm hoping folks will think about those questions, put your answers in the chat, and we're going to see you at 10:45. Thank you all so much to Representative Reyes, Marcus Smith, and Lorenzo Wyatt. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Gannon. Thanks, everybody.
Hello, everyone. It's now 10:45. I'm going to give folks another few seconds to file back in if you had to step away, as I did. So we'll get started in about 30 seconds. As you can see, this existing slide on your screen is a word cloud of folks who had registered to attend today. We're so very pleased to see the number of diverse advocates here at the table and representatives, some of which are fuel banks, state agents, private entity folks. We're just very well, municipal government. We're very pleased to see that you're all with us today, and we thank you very much for you could be anywhere else in a virtual space, but you just decided to join us here today, so thank you very much. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Welcome back, everyone. At the top of our summit, I asked a question. We're going to put that question back into the chat. What the question was, what do you believe is the result of thoughtful planning, cooperation, and coordination? Please limit your answers to 4 or 5 words only. Type them into the chat, and our Operation Fuel team will capture and share them in a word cloud that we'll display later. So I want to introduce Commissioner Dykes, which Operation Fuel owes a lot to. Before and after her appointment as the Commissioner of DEEP, she was always someone that I could count on as a listening ear, and had prior to her appointment at DEEP, we never really heard of anyone focused so much on energy affordability and energy equity, and that was at the top of her many priorities. And it was amplified during the GC3 process. Several climate change stakeholders gathered at DEEP in September 2019 to watch the governor sign Executive Order number 3, expanding the membership and responsibilities of the Governor's Council on Climate Change. A few months later, we gathered again as members of the GC3 at the Legislative Office building. I looked to my left and I looked to my right, and I was pleased with what I saw. A diverse group of stakeholders ready to take this on, but none of us knew what was to come in 2020. Because of the pandemic, we forged ahead anyway. The tone felt more urgent because of the pandemic. The mandate was loud and clear. Through the lens of equity and justice, we must do this work. So we here at Operation Fuel are really grateful to Commissioner Dykes, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce her as she leads us into the water portion of our webinar today. Take it away, Katie.
Great. Well, thank you, Brenda. And I just want to thank you for your service on the Governor's Council on Climate Change. I saw the prompt in the question about the things that keep you up at night related to climate, and certainly one of the things that's been really concerning to me, unfortunately, about 2 weeks ago, we released our most recent report. We do one every year tracking how Connecticut is doing in meeting our greenhouse gas emission targets for 2030 and 2050. And the trends are not going in the right direction. We've seen there's a bit of a lag in the data. So the most recent year that we have data for is 2018, but it shows us that our emissions from buildings has actually been increasing moderately, which is not good news when we need to reduce emissions from buildings by about 30% between now and the end of the decade. So we've got a lot of work to do, but it's been a pleasure to listen to some of the speakers earlier in the today's event. It's we're privileged here in our state. We have 20 years of experience and investment that we've been supporting through the Conservation Load Management Program in energy efficiency. We know that we can't deliver on these goals without the participation, engagement, and frankly, folks making this their livelihood, people who have built businesses and grown employment and engagement around delivering energy efficiency services here in our state. We've had some bumpy ride, bumps in the road in terms of the sweeps of the funding from prior years. I'm proud that under Governor Lamont's leadership, we've had 2 budget cycles where we have not seen legislators, we haven't had budgets tapping into these critical sources of funding to fill budget holes. And so we know what that means for being able to support employment and the critical businesses that are delivering on these energy efficiency services all around the state. And I appreciated the comments from Lorenzo Wyatt about COVID as well. It's been kind of an adrenaline-filled a year and a half, I think, as we've really adapted to new ways of getting the work done. We knew how important it was to not pause on providing energy efficiency services during the pandemic, because as much as people have been struggling with the public health impacts of the pandemic, we also know that people have been struggling with the economic downturn associated with the pandemic. And that's when energy efficiency services, delivering bill savings and healthier homes is more critical than ever. So I just want to thank all of the contractors, all of the partners that have been out there delivering these programs during this time that we've needed them more than ever. And I'm proud that our department has been a partner in helping people be innovative and finding ways to keep the programs going during these challenging times. We're at a moment now that obviously those economic challenges are even more stark than ever. We know that folks have been struggling with paying their bills over the last 2 years. And this is a time that we're so grateful for resources and organizations like Operation Fuel that are working with people every day to help families navigate these challenges of being able to pay for their energy bills, pay for their energy costs. We are very focused on this as we see changes going on right now in natural gas prices that are affecting the price of electricity. We're headed into what might be a very challenging winter in terms of electricity prices. And again, this is a moment when those most vulnerable populations need our services the most. And so that's why I think the focus on equity and affordability, ensuring that these programs are serving everyone, and especially those who are carrying the highest energy burden, is absolutely essential. I'm proud, we have the opportunity coming up here to review the new conservation load management plan for the next 3 years. It's proposing a $707 million investment in energy efficiency. And it's focused on 3 key priorities, I think, reflecting on the priorities that this group has been talking about for so many years: equity, decarbonization, and energy affordability. This proposed plan is going to create 36,000 jobs and support 36,000 jobs annually. It'll create lifetime savings of 55.5 million MMBTUs, 5 million tons of reduced carbon emissions. Absolutely critical, the services that are going to be provided through this upcoming plan. We're going to be looking at opportunities to strengthen the plan's focus on reducing emissions. And so I anticipate in reviewing the proposed plan, we'll be directing the utilities to make some changes that will maximize both energy savings and carbon emissions reductions. Climate change is a critical issue for the electric power grid because we're having to operate this grid under more extreme weather conditions. And so it's absolutely essential that that becomes a center point of our review of the conservation load management plan. And to strengthen the plan's focus on equity, low-income residential energy efficiency offerings will be supported by a new health and safety barrier mitigation program starting in 2022. We know almost a third of low-income homes are prevented from participating in the efficiency programs due to the presence of health and safety barriers. And I know this audience today is well familiar with those challenges. So we are going to be leveraging up to $12 million in federal funding to create a new program to remediate those barriers for low-income customers so that they can go on to participate in HESIE and the Weatherization Assistance Program. We're in the process of selecting a program operator for this new program through a competitive RFP. The program will serve at least 200 homes in the first 12 months of operation, but you can be assured I'm very, focused on how do we make this something that's truly scalable because the scale of the need is so enormous in our state. I know also we're going to be looking at, of course, how to tackle this energy affordability crisis in Connecticut on a much broader scale. Connecticut's average residential retail electricity rate is 22 cents per kilowatt hour. It's the highest in the continental US. And these high rates place a significant burden on households with low income, who must pay rates that are not tailored to their household income. And so this is an energy affordability crisis that really warrants the implementation of a low income discount rate. I want to say to Brenda, and I know the Green Bank has been a partner in this too, the continued research that and reports that you've been preparing on the affordability challenge for low income households, including not just electricity and the heating costs, but also transportation costs, I think is so powerful and so impactful. I share that with policymakers and legislators all the time. So thank you for shining a spotlight on that issue. And I've been trying to do everything that I can to expand the number of folks who are aware of are super fans of Operation Fuel and aware of your terrific advocacy and work that you're doing, in addition to providing critical services for families in the state. Of course, with the energy affordability crisis, it's in the combination with the already present threat of climate change. We're also leading the charge on establishing more comprehensive and integrated approaches to housing retrofits, beginning with helping to decarbonize and reduce energy costs of affordable housing in Connecticut. I think folks are familiar with Public Act 21-48, which has given DEEP the authority to provide grants using federal ARPA funds for a wide range of measures for affordable housing. Including a whole home approach, starting with barrier remediation, energy efficiency and weatherization, rooftop solar, energy storage, EV charging, and heat pumps. We're really excited about this program. It's been great to hear, a number of other states are kind of watching our progress here. And once again, Connecticut has the opportunity to be a leader, and prove new models that can be replicated elsewhere. I want to say, as we transition this conversation today to water efficiency, and then I'll wrap up. I think as DEEP Commissioner, of course, I've started my career working on energy, on heating and electricity policy issues. But of course, in my present role, I have the opportunity to also work closely with our team that's been delivering on policies related to water quality and water quantity for many years. And I think that this is one of the benefits of having this merged agency of environment and energy all under one roof, is that we have the opportunity to lead on policy that can ensure that our water utilities have the tools that they need to act proactively. Water conservation is an electricity energy saver, and it's also critical for enhancing more resilient or advancing resilience in the face of more weather extremes. I think it's hard for people maybe to remember after the insanity of the intense rainstorms and above average precipitation that we've been experiencing this summer, that last summer we were talking a lot about drought and experiencing the impacts of prolonged drought in our state. And so we have to be prepared for both extremes. And so that's why we're very interested in continuing to push the conversation on ensuring that those benefits related to water efficiency are just as meaningful and are just as centered in the operations and the investments of our water utilities as they are for our electric and natural gas utilities. So this is a really important area. And I loved hearing the conversation earlier about weatherization measures, also looking at making sure our buildings are resilient to the impacts of precipitation and humidity and all of the challenges that I think homeowners and building owners have been experiencing this year with the high rainfall events. Drought, I think, factors in there as well. So in any case, lots of work to do in this space, but we have the best people working on it all across the state, starting with you, Brenda, and so many others that have joined us today. So thanks so much for the opportunity to be part of this event, for bringing us all together for this conversation, and for all the work that everyone's doing. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Katie. I just had my mouth open there because I just witnessed a car accident outside of my window. How awful. They're having a bad day, but we're going to go ahead and forge ahead to our panel discussion. We're going to start with Denise Savageau, who is the president of the Connecticut Association of Conservation Districts, a network of local nonprofits that promote conservation and sound use of local resources, including the preservation of fragile water resources, technical support for municipalities and citizens, and education around ethic and environmental stewardship. So thank you so much, Denise, for being here. I met Denise several years ago and learned so much from her in that short time that I've gotten to know her, and it really is a pleasure to have her join us today. So we're going to go ahead. We're going to go ahead and pull up Denise's slides. Here we go. Take it away, Denise.
All right, thank you, Brenda. So if we could start at the beginning, thanks. So it's been a pleasure to be listening to all the conversation today on energy efficiency. And again, thanks to Operation Fuel for inviting us. I think it's really timely to be bringing in water into this conversation because the nexus between water and energy is, you know, in our face. We need to pay attention to it and we need to think about it. I'm going to talk a little bit about water as we're talking about water conservation and water efficiency from the bigger perspective. I'm a land use planner, so we're going to be talking about it from that perspective. So if you could bring up my slide and yeah, there we go. Thank you. Appreciate that. So next slide. Okay, so from a just sustainability perspective, I wanted to touch base on this because there's a lot of discussion on when we're talking about land use and, you know, when we're talking about water, it's all about land use. So we need to balance this social justice and environmental justice. A lot of times we hear social justice people and we're talking about housing and economic opportunities and transportation and public health. We're talking about a host of things. And then we hear environmental justice, and that's environmental quality and making sure that we have, you know, don't have inequities there. It's about food security. It's about access to open space. So it's not just the burden we have of pollution, but it's the access to environmental benefits as well. And so some folks have come up and termed this that we have to have just sustainability. We can't just have social justice or environmental justice. We need to combine them. We need to have both. And that's really important in part of the discussion, particularly from a land use perspective and particularly from a water quality quantity perspective. Next slide, please. So we're talking about just sustainabilities. I love this quote, and it's that people don't get all of the connections. They say the environment is over here, civil rights group is over here, the women's group is over there, and other groups are wherever they are. But actually, they're all one group. And I think that's the importance of us talking about just sustainability, is that it's about that we need to have this. If we're looking at affordable housing, is it really affordable if we're not meeting environmental justice needs at the same time? So we need to be talking about that when we're talking about land use regulations and how we move forward. So next slide, please. So when we look at land use regulations, I just want to quickly point out to people that this is balancing private property rights. So we have the private property rights, you know, that people have the right to do with their own property, balancing it with the public good, the public trust. How, you know, what does the public benefit? How do we balance those needs? So that's what land use regulations do. So in the context of water and water quality, are we making sure that we are protecting water for drinking? Are we making sure that we're not allowing for more flooding? How are those environmental regulations? How are they serving the public good, but also making sure that we're doing them in a manner that doesn't infringe on private property rights, which is a big premise of, you know, our land rights in Connecticut. Next slide, please. And so there's kind of an urban myth out there that I'd like to talk about, and it has to do with the fact that it says development costs associated with land use are preventing affordable housing. And I challenge that premise. I don't see that. I actually see it as protecting affordable housing. If we're making sure people aren't in the flood zones, if we're making sure that they have access to clean air and tree canopy and open space, that should be part of affordable housing. And so the urban truth is that we undervalue these external costs associated with ecosystem services, and we don't pay attention to what needs to be happening. So we need to look at those. What are the external benefits that we get from open space that we need to have near affordable housing? What are the external costs associated with if we don't do it right, putting them in floodplains? And I'm going to give you some examples of this, and particularly because of the topic here, water, I'm going to relate those to water. So next slide, please. So as I had started out, there's a nexus between energy and water that we need to understand to address both resiliency and equity. So the first question I want to ask, and we're going to have a poll come up, is do people even know where their drinking water supply comes from? So I'm asking folks, where does the water supply in your home come from? And I believe a poll is going to be coming up. There we go. So are you served by surface water reservoir, a public water supply well, groundwater, a private residential well, or do you not know where your water is coming from? So we're going to see who knows where their drinking water supply is coming from. And we'll see if our audience matches the percentages that we have across the state of Connecticut. We'll talk about those a little bit more later. So can we move on with the slide presentation while the poll is going, or do we need to leave that down for a minute? There we go. So 37% of the folks on here are saying they're served by surface water percent, 28% by public well, 7% I don't know, and 28% residential well. So let me just tell you quickly, in terms of in Connecticut, 23% of our population is served by private well, 35% is served by a public water supply that is well supplied, groundwater supplied, and 65% is surface water. So a lot of people don't know how much of our water is coming from reservoirs and surface waters, as well as public utility groundwater. It's something we need to pay attention to, but we protect surface waters differently than we protect groundwater. So when we're talking about source water protection, we really need to look at that, where the water is coming from and how we're protecting that. So if I could have my next slide, please. So there's a lot of things we could talk about with just sustainability. There's a whole issue we could talk about it, from an energy perspective, for example, what's sustainable in terms of climate change and energy. And we had a whole lot of discussion today about energy efficiency. We could talk about renewable energies. With this panel on water, I wanted to focus on these three things: increased flooding. And although that's not quite about water conservation, I just want to put that in perspective. And it's a timely topic since we've had some flooding this year, to just put that out there. But then more to the topic at hand with water efficiency is water supply impacts and water and energy efficiency, and how we marry those two together. So if I could have my next slide. So this is a really busy slide, so I'm not sure if everybody can see everything in the smaller format. But the big issue here is when talking about just sustainability and where we're going to locate homes, the idea is that who gets to live at the top of the hill? And, a lot of times we think that we will be efficient, or I should say equitable, with our placement of homes, affordable housing in particular, if we just elevate the home. So we don't have to put them on the top of the hill. It's all right if we build in a floodplain. We just have to make sure they were based above base flood elevation. But there's a lot of problems with that. Are we bringing people to a nuisance? So that, as for example, along the coast, as sea level rise changes, are we going to be having those changes in base flood elevations and the houses having to be, elevated even further? Are we going to be able to pump water out if we're relying on pumps because now we're below sea level rise? What are the flood insurance costs? Evacuation. People don't realize that when you have a home in a flood area, even though your house is elevated, that protects the structure on first floor, but it doesn't protect you. And you still need to evacuate. And there are challenges where that's where we saw, for example, on Sandy Point in New York, where we had big fires after during Superstorm Sandy, where people didn't evacuate. We had similar problems along the Connecticut coast where folks didn't evacuate because they felt that their homes were elevated, so they didn't have to evacuate for the flooding. But because utilities were turned off and there were high winds, that we had high fire impact. So we had those challenges. And then people don't understand that, a lot of times your utilities are automatically shut off in flood zones. So you don't have access to all of the utilities, including gas. So people think, oh, my electric's going out, but I'll be all set because I'm on gas. Well, that's not the case. And I did want to talk about the idea of mildew and mold. A lot of times in these low areas, we're building homes and say, okay, we'll either elevate and or we'll build them on slabs because we have a high groundwater table. And that really creates problems for mold and mildew. And it increases the burden for folks who are more vulnerable in terms of having to have dehumidifiers, increasing their energy costs and whatever. So there's lots of challenges here that we really need to think about. And one of the challenges, again, is gentrification after major storm events, where all of a sudden folks who thought they were okay in a floodplain bought the house and realized that they can't, even with flood insurance, can't afford to fix their house or elevate their houses. And we end up in seeing gentrification of neighborhoods overnight. So we really need to think about long-term, how are we establishing long-term communities and where's the best place to do this. So just wanted to bring this up as we're talking about the larger issue of climate change and water resources. Next slide, please. So when we talk about water supply, and this is where we're really going to talk about water supply and water conservation, there's things we want to think about. Right now with climate change, we're seeing this increased frequency of drought. And we're seeing an increase in algal blooms, particularly during when we have a drought. So during the drought, we have low flows, the water heats up more, it promotes more algal blooms. That decreases our water quality. So we have some real challenges there. It also, we have problems with our local food supply. If we have a lot of drought, then our farmers and our urban community gardens are having problems with a reduction in food supply. So we have increased food security, and this is not then just local, it can be regional and it can be national as we're looking at droughts across our region and where we get food from. So we're seeing problems that way, and we're seeing increased demand for water during extreme heat days, whether it be for outdoor irrigation, but also just internal use. We use more water for showers and for laundry and whatever when we have extreme heat days. So we're looking at that. And of course, it all relates to, and this is one of the premises we want to talk about, is increased utility bills. So we're, looking at challenges with increased utility bills from a water supply, the more water that we use. And I just want to put out that during COVID, we really saw this. We saw a change in water utility bills from people who normally went to school, normally went to work, and now they're home 24/7. And all of the water use, instead of most of the water use being at work or at school or, out someplace else besides at the home, now everybody was at home, flushing their toilets more, using more water, having to wash their hands. We were talking about increased sanitation during COVID and telling everybody to wash their hands repeatedly. So we had those challenges, and we need to think about that. So when we think about that from a pandemic perspective, we also want to think about it from that whole climate change, both when we have acute things like storm events and drought, but also long term. We're not going to just have extreme heat events. We're going to have continued chronic, times of increased heat, and that's going to impact this. So when we think about water supply and we think about solutions, we're going to think about water conservation, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more, as well as source water protection. I want to point out that we want to, when we're protecting our water supply, and we're, from climate change, and we're talking about being more resilient, and we're talking about being more efficient with our water, we need to start right from the beginning. Where does our water come from, and what's the role of our forests? So no net loss of forests in Connecticut is really important from a public drinking water supply perspective, from holding that water in place during flooding. So we want to really look at that. And we need to restore and maintain community forests, so that urban open space. So yes, we need forests across all of Connecticut, but particularly looking at increasing forests in our urban open spaces. And then one of the things that people don't understand is a lot of times when we're talking about no net loss of forests or open space preservation in terms of protecting public drinking water supplies and flood control, is that a lot of that has to do with the soil health of those forests, of those urban landscapes, and making sure that we have healthy soil that's going to hold the water and filtrate the water, so that we have clean water going into our groundwater and running off into our reservoir systems. We need healthy soils, and we need the vegetation and the forests around that to make sure that we have healthy water supplies. And this has to do, again, back to that where we started, with land use decisions that we're making related to how we handle water and the landscape. Next slide, please. So the theme of today was about water and energy efficiency. And again, I had said I'm going to talk about these two a little bit differently. What we know is that 40% of operating costs for drinking water systems can be energy. So when we're looking at what is the cost the water utilities have and that they're passing on to consumers, for as much as 40% of that is in cleaning up our water. And additionally, from a perspective of a municipality, when we're not doing good water conservation, and therefore we're flushing our toilets and whatever, and it's going into our wastewater treatment systems, one of the largest utility bills from an electric perspective is our wastewater treatment plants in municipalities. So whether you're the city of Bridgeport or the city of New Haven, if you look at their utility bills and you look at their wastewater treatment systems, it's a huge bill. So if we conserve water and not putting it down the drains, that means we reduce the burden on our wastewater treatment system, and they don't have to treat as much water, and that would reduce utility bills. So I'm going to talk about these in two separate contexts. One is water conservation, and that's, I started getting into that a little bit here, and then source water protection. Next slide, please. So again, with water conservation, we're going to look at that energy efficiency. What are those utility bills related to? How much energy does it take us to get clean water and to treat the water as it goes out the other end? We want to talk about drought resiliency, water conservation. During a drought, we need to think about that. We don't have an unlimited supply of water. It is limited. And even though we have a rainy year like we had this year, we had a drought last year, and we need to pay attention. In a very water-rich state, we do have challenges with drought, and particularly because we're looking at not just the amount of water, but the quality of the water. So if we want to make sure that we have clean drinking water, we really need to pay attention that we don't have unlimited access to water during drought. And again, we talk about that better water quality. So the more we do for water conservation, leaving waters in the stream and making sure that we have a good stream flows, we can prevent those algal blooms and increase our better water quality. When we do this, we have reduced costs to customers, and particularly from a water filtration perspective. If we can have better water going into our reservoirs and whatever, we can reduce our cost to customers. So at home, water conservation, we want to reduce our water utility bill. And that means water sense appliances, fixing all those leaks. So just as we have energy efficiency programs, and some of the energy efficiency programs actually do look at what's happening, particularly with our water heaters, what's happening with the hot water system, because the more hot water we heat, then the more energy we're using. So if we have good plumbing, particularly with showers and laundry where we're using hot water, kitchen sink where we're using hot water, we reduce our utility bills. And I want to point out that I talked about heat, but we also want to look at pumping water. So for people who are on private wells, there's a big cost to pumping the water, and that increases your electric bill. And that's similar even with water utilities. So how we're transferring water from one place to another, it's not just the cost of treating water, it's also the cost of moving water from one place to another. There's enormous costs and energy expended to pump water. So if we're looking at water conservation and we're using less water, that means we have less water we have to treat and less water we have to pump. And so those are really important things that we need to take into consideration, both in terms of at our private homes as well as in our suppliers. Next slide, please. So I would be remiss if I didn't talk about source water protection and how important this is to water efficiency and water conservation. Source water protection. So we talk about source water by definition in the Safe Drinking Water Act that the Environmental Protection Agency enforces. It's a federal water act that looks at protecting drinking water. So when we talk about source water protection, we're talking about our drinking water supplies. We're not talking about headwater streams. We're talking about drinking water supplies. So making sure that we're protecting drinking water supplies at the source reduces the cost of water filtration. And I'll just give you an example. New York City was looking at a multi-million-dollar investment to have to upgrade their filtration plants because the water coming into their system from their reservoirs was not as clean as they would like it to be. So they had two options: build a massive infiltration system, again, at the cost of multi-million dollars, or invest in source water protection by protecting the lands around the reservoirs and the forests around the reservoirs where the public drinking water supply was doing. And what they opted for was a watershed management plan that really did source water protection. And the interesting part of that was that they did this avoidance of costs. So rather than, and then they don't have to pass on that cost to customers. So that looked at no net loss of forest, land preservation, riparian and inland wetlands protection, minimizing impervious cover, non-point source pollution. So when we're looking at all of those, and it gets back to my first couple of slides when I'm talking about just sustainability, we need to be thinking about how we're protecting our public drinking water supply and passing on those costs. So again, the best and most cost-efficient way to protect drinking water is to protect the land in the watershed. And I want to say that distributed energy generation has a role to play here, because we want to be having our energy generation closest to where we are, and we don't want to be cutting down forests and impacting water quality by creating large swaths of impervious cover. When we put 100 acres of solar panels and we cut down a forest to do that, and then we have 100 acres, we've now created immense impervious cover that is going to either impact, if it's a public drinking water supply watershed, the public drinking water supply, and or increase flooding and impacts to water quality in our neighborhoods. So, downstream. And the last thing I want to say here is I want to make sure that people understand that there's a relationship between drinking water supply, all of our waters, and what we're looking here in terms of source water protection. So it's really important that we do this from a cost perspective and a water efficiency perspective. Next slide. So just back as I wanted to wrap it up, to attain just sustainability, particularly as we're looking at water, we don't need to abandon land use regulations. We should be looking at some different economic models. I always like to say, what's their solution? So right now, when we talk about affordable housing, for example, we're talking about private development. So we have private development, and we utilize that and then try to incentivize private development by, the Connecticut General Statutes 8-30G, which basically gives private development an incentive. But what it does is it kind of tells municipalities like, unless you have a really good reason, we need to, change, not look at zoning, not look at some of our environmental regulations. And I think we do need to really pay attention to this for the reasons I stated. There's reasons for some of these laws. I'm not saying that we don't have some inequities in some of our zoning laws, and we definitely need to change some of that. But we also cannot throw out the environmental regulations if we truly want affordable housing that is not just affordable, but is also environmentally just. So we need to do that just sustainability. The other way we do this is a public, that we have affordable housing is with public authorities. And one of the challenges there is that's then all publicly funded. And one of the things that I have seen is, they start putting energy efficiency and they start putting water quality in. Where are they located? And a lot of times we are citing, and this is something across the country, where we are citing these in lands that are the cheapest. So where's the cheapest land? Again, not at the top of the hill, might be at the bottom of the hill. And so we need to look at some different models. Next slide. So I just wanted to talk about one model, and this is just one. There's other models that we could look at, but they're using this in the, in Europe, and they're using this across the United States, and they're B corporations. The B stands for benefit. And what they are is for-profit corporations. So they have equity and they're looking for equity, but they have investors who want to do social justice or environmental justice. And therefore, their mission, so when you have a B corporation that is a B corporation to bring in affordable housing, their mission is not just putting in affordable housing, but doing it sustainably and equitably so that we don't have to worry about this. Want to make sure that people understand that, you can do affordable housing, but we may need to look at a different economic model. And rather than abandon our land use regulations, maybe we can look at some different economic models that will incentivize doing it in a just and sustainable manner. So just in summary, and I just want to wrap up, is I want to make one point clear, and that is when we're looking, whether it be at affordable housing or looking at water supplies and water, I want to point out that we can't just protect the public drinking water supplies for cities like Hartford, cities like New Haven, cities like Bridgeport, and all of our more vulnerable folks. If we only look at doing work within the city, I want to make sure people understand that there's a connection between the rural landscape and the city landscape. For example, in Hartford, the public drinking water supply is the Barkhamsted Reservoir. So that's up in Barkhamsted. We have small, and smaller communities up there. Similarly, Bridgeport, the reservoirs for Bridgeport are in East and Weston. So I want to make sure that as we're talking about equity and whatever, and what we need to do about the landscape, particularly from a water perspective, we really need to think about water across, again, the landscape, and not say, oh, we can just fix it here, we need to fix it there. We need to look at how water moves across the landscape and how important it is to protect our open spaces and our forests. And that's why something like a policy on no net loss of forest is really important from an equity perspective, not just thinking like, oh, well, that's more open space for folks who already have open space, but really think about it in terms of protecting us from flooding, protecting us from droughts, and ensuring we have adequate water supply that's both clean and abundant. And I think that's it. Next slide. Yep, so I'm finished and I will turn this back over to Brenda.
Thank you so much, Denise. There's a lot there, and I know we're going to have some questions in the chat coming through. But I wanted to start us off by challenging everyone to look at what the definition of environmental justice is, because I believe you hit a very important point at the beginning of your presentation, that environmental justice for folks in Hartford doesn't just mean staying within the city. You know, protecting our water resources in Bark-Hempstead and Weston and Easton is critical to people who live in our cities. So thank you for that. The question that I wanted to lead off with was, I want you to talk a little bit about your experience with the GC3 process, and if you feel that there was any opportunity missed, and if there's an opportunity to perhaps kind of pick up where we left off with the GC3 and implement those thoughts or recommendations in the next iteration of the state water plan.
So thank you. I was thrilled to be a part of the GC3 process. The one thing I'm concerned about as we move forward is there's a lot of emphasis on the greenhouse gas, and I think the energy work needs to happen, and you know, we all supportive of this. But I served on the working and natural lands subgroups, and those are not moving forward, and they did great work, and hopefully that work will be incorporated, because the work of the working and natural lands, for example, the other ones who talked at, there was a rivers group, there was a forestry group, there was a soils group, and there was a wetlands group. And you probably heard me talk about all of those in my talk and how important they were to climate change mitigation, both making sure that we're mitigating for drought, we're mitigating for flooding. And I think we need to look at how those tie in. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that the ecosystem services also tie into carbon sequestration. And so, you know, our wetlands and our forests. And so there's multiple ecosystem services. And I think it's important for us to look across that. And I think the one other thing I would say is I think there needs to be more emphasis on distributed generation, particularly from an equity perspective. We're doing a lot of work, great work, and led by folks like yourselves and the prior panel on energy efficiency. But our electric utilities have not embraced distributed generation, and we need them to. You know, it's like, wouldn't it be great that we would have solar panels in appropriate places and solar panels on houses, so that it's not just electric rates that need to come down, that we have access to renewable energy on our rooftops in low-income communities. And we don't see distributed generation as a major initiative, I think, for the environmental justice community. And I think we should, for example, any housing authority work that's going up, or if we're letting folks do, come in under 8-30G, why are we not requiring solar panels on the roof? So we want the houses to be energy efficiency, but we could also be saying, what do we need to do to make sure that, you know, we're now looking at alternative energies as well in this distributed generation. I think it's really important discussion that needs to happen.
I agree. I just heard this morning a recent stat that we're averaging now, I believe it's 12 $1 billion natural disasters annually. And that distributed generation could help provide a little bit more safety for folks who lose power during and after a storm. So thank you for bringing that up. I also wanted to ask, do you believe that it's time for us to update our water efficiency standards?
I do. I think it's time to update the water efficiency standards. We're talking about that, as you know, at the Water Planning Council. And I don't think it would be a heavy lift. Connecticut was the lead years ago in having the best water efficiency standards. And now we are not. in the lead. We are not the worst. We have fairly decent energy efficiency standards, but really that talks about plumbing, and what it does is it just makes that as people are, you know, updating the plumbing in their houses and whatever, that they're using, you know, energy efficient and water sense appliances and upping those. We've come such a long way. You know, I know people had problems way back when we first put energy efficiency standards in for low flow toilets and they supposedly didn't flush right. We're way beyond that. All of this, all the new technology, the toilets work right. And, you know, the water sense, all the appliances work right that are water sense. And I think we need to update to those standards, particularly in the plumbing codes.
Excellent. It reminds me of when folks challenged, you know, electric vehicles about 20 years ago, and now you see many more of them on the road. So, all right, we're going to now jump into Lori Mathau. So Denise, please stick around. Lori Mathau, I'm going to go ahead and introduce her. She's the Public Health Drinking Water Section Chief at the Connecticut Department of Public Health, which is responsible for the administration of state and federal drinking water regulations, and is dedicated to ensuring the quality and adequacy of the state's public drinking water sources. I also wanted to highlight that Lori sat on our very first water roundtable discussion back in 2018. She has been a huge advocate regarding energy efficiency and affordability for folks who are struggling with the cost of water as that cost continues to increase. So Lori, thank you so much for being here today. I've learned so much from you, and we'll go ahead and open up your slides and allow you to take it away.
Well, good morning, Brenda, and thank you very much to everyone at Operation Fuel. I have been listening in at the very beginning and very intrigued with the previous discussion because as a new branch chief of drinking water and environmental health units, we work in the areas not only in drinking water regulation, but other disciplines in environmental health, which includes a lead program, an asbestos program. And we are working really hard to become more engaged in all of the efforts, including healthy homes and a number of items that we had heard from previous. So again, I'm Lori Mathau. I'm the branch chief of the Environmental Health and Drinking Water branch at the Connecticut Department of Public Health. Next slide, please. So who do I represent? I represent a branch mostly of regulators in the drinking water section, which is part of the branch. As you heard the previous speaker, Denise, speak about and wonderfully explain from you know, her point of view of where she sits and what she sees and where the concerns are. And Denise and I have worked together, it seems like forever, our entire careers. But in our world, within the Department of Public Health, in drinking water very specifically, we are regulators. We are the regulators of the public water systems. And the state of Connecticut has had primacy of the federal EPA Safe Drinking Water Act since 1976. What does that mean? We enact a whole series of laws that is water quality, water quantity, that has oversight of and regulates the public water systems across our state. There's 2,400 of them. Many of those are very small systems, but also there's about 80 systems that serve over 1,000 people, and there's about 40 of those serve more than 10,000 people. So you have quite a variety of public systems, from large systems to small. We also oversee, as you heard Denise talk so well about source water protection. The state of Connecticut program for drinking water has been around since the early 1900s. We've had well over 100 years of state law that has dealt with protecting our drinking water supplies. And that's good for the state of Connecticut. We have very strong source water protection laws. We have very proactive anti-pollution laws of our drinking water supplies. Some of those laws, and laws always need help. Laws aren't to be set and forgotten about. Laws in our world, one of our responsibilities is many of these programs that we oversee are driven by having a foundation of state statute and then regulation on top of that. These laws need to be updated continuously, and that's a big part of our work. When we see an issue such as climate change, an issue is emerging contaminants and other things that come along with it, we must progress and update and keep our laws sharp and working and moving in the right direction. We have engineers within our group. We inspect the larger community systems, which there are 500 community public water systems, and each one of those every 3 years has an inspection. We oversee water quality. Information comes into our data systems, and we review for compliance with the Safe Drinking Water Act. We have enforcement of acute risk issues and water quality, and includes lead, exceedances, and emerging contaminants. We're in charge of we work very closely with our colleagues at EPA headquarters in new laws new rules under the Safe Drinking Water Act that are moving forward, such as the lead and copper rule revisions that is slowly moving its way, as well as possibly PFAS regulation in the future by the federal government. We also oversee a certification and training of water operators and distribution operators, the people that on the ground do the work and provide the water that you all consume for public drinking water. We work on many different issues, including storm response, aging infrastructure, small system issues, capacity issues, Legionella, and a variety of water quality issues that come our way. And we implement and integrate our drinking water state revolving loan fund program we've had since 1996, and have loaned well over $390 million since 1996. We have an environmental health program as well. It oversees a variety of environmental health programs, working directly, most of these, with our local health directors, which there are 64 of those. So that is a lot of work. And again, I'll just highlight the private well program, the lead program, asbestos, and many, many others that deal with everything you can think of on environmental health. So that's our branch. Next slide, please. And what we do and what we regulate and how closely we work with the local communities. The challenge, I know Brenda and a number of all of you have mentioned the challenges over the last year and a half. COVID-19 has changed our world dramatically. Our critical work, though, in drinking water has continued on. It must continue on. In March of 2020, a group of us with the larger utilities, water system utilities, got together to talk about critical function planning. We didn't know what was we didn't have an idea of what was coming at us. We didn't have an idea of how sick people would get, how quickly that would happen. We wanted to make sure that we had critical functions in place and they had people to take care of our drinking water treatment systems so that water could and would continue to flow. That was an absolute. Failure is not an option in our world. So that continued on, and we worked together. The importance of planning showed up during the time of COVID. We made sure, without the planning that we have in place today, and the way that the water utilities enact those plans, we would have been in much more difficult situation than we have been able to deal with what has faced us over the last 20 years. We have a new commissioner, Commissioner Datani. I had a chance to meet her just recently and present on our program to her. She's wonderful. She's from Yale. She's a practicing MD, practicing infectious disease doctor. And she is going to emphasize drinking water and environmental health like none other. We're very pleased to welcome her and start our work together in public health. So there are many challenges. We've heard a lot about environmental justice, but the words health equity have not come forward yet. Our work as health agents within the Department of Public Health is to work and understand health equity and understand how that works to help vulnerable populations. The words social vulnerability index, if you're not familiar with that term, please look it up. It is a term I'll speak to a little bit more in more detail if I have some time, but it is these concepts of health equity, helping and understanding how to assist vulnerable populations, and utilizing the tools that CDC has put together for social vulnerability index, and then how all this works with environmental justice and our colleagues at DEP. And in the end, and in the foundation, it's overlying and underlying is safe drinking water and public health. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about safe drinking water and bringing it. It is a public health protection program and measure. And in our state, we're very lucky to have the building blocks and the foundation of laws that we have, but there are challenges. So next slide, please. There's always a challenge, and as you heard Denise talk about drinking water quality, we have 150 reservoir systems. We have over 4,000 public drinking water supply wells. That's a lot of reservoirs, a lot of surface water, a lot of groundwater supplies that are spread throughout our state of Connecticut. And that serves about 2.8 million people in our state, the community systems. The private wells, as you heard Denise mention, there are, we estimate about 325,000 private wells that serve over 800,000 people in the state of Connecticut. So that you can see the split between your private sources and your public supplies. And within Connecticut, the map shows them all over the place. And in certain towns, you'll have a variety and a mix of public systems, private well private wells that serve neighborhoods. And every town you go into, it can be a very different circumstance. There's a whole host of existing source water protection laws. We are unique in the country with a couple laws. One, from 1971, 22A 417 in particular. It protects our drinking water supply reservoirs. In those reservoir watersheds, the drainage area that brings the water into the reservoir itself assures that there is no sewage treatment plant discharge upstream of a drinking water reservoir. That's unique across the country. No other state has that law. We are very lucky, and it has protected our drinking water quality since 1971. So a lot of people had foresight way back. And even before 1971, some of our laws are very, very protective. You can't swim, you can't just jet ski, you can't use a gasoline motor within our drinking water supply reservoirs. That has brought us great raw water quality. Now, the Safe Drinking Water Act comes along in 1974 and says, well, you need to provide treatment, you need to test for all of these contaminants, you need to make sure that you can protect public health, lead and copper rule, and now needs to be revised. So these rules are constantly being revised and looked at by EPA at the federal level, and we're finding new issues constantly. PFAS is one of them, perfluorinated compounds. Extreme weather events, as you heard Denise and so very nicely lay out, it's extreme weather that is, whether or not you agree with climate change or not, I think everyone on this call would probably say, yes, we're going through some interesting times, and extreme weather events cause issues with water quality and quantity. And these are the challenges of the future. Legionella, water quality. When we make buildings efficient, we also need to understand the impact of water quality and water flow within those buildings. Legionella and some other up and coming waterborne diseases that are out there need to be very understood, and the water utilities have to be part, as well as us at the health department, understanding that impact on flow, water flow, is really very important. Cyanobacteria, Denise mentioned it. The growth of this bacteria can impact water quality. We're interestingly seeing some interesting taste and odor complaints, which means that there could be a growth in a variety of bacteria within the raw water quality. PFAS is not yet fully regulated at all, regulated by EPA, and has put a stress on many states, and including Connecticut. And it's an up and coming contaminant that needs to be dealt with. It's very prevalent. It's essentially, your Scotchgard, your Teflon, and many, many products. And, to the great work of Deep and Commissioner Dykes, and moving forward with a couple of very impactful bills in the legislature for the foam, and getting the foam out of the hands of the firemen and getting a replacement foam. Then also in food products. So very important. Resilience, affordability, and small system issues, as well as cybersecurity is a huge threat to our drinking water systems, and needs to constantly be thought through. Planning is so very important. The state, as Brenda mentioned, as Denise mentioned, the state water plan, we see it and approved by the legislature in 2019 as the umbrella plan for all the other plans that are mentioned here. We have quite a few plans that are finished and completed just in the last couple of years. And we're very lucky, whether it's drought, whether it's emerging contaminants, whether it's vulnerability and resiliency, but implementing these plans has become even more important. Climate change is another plan that was, again, a wonderful work during a very stressful time. During the time of COVID, we actually got together and finished a very important, impactful statewide plan for climate change. And within that, there are a number of public health recommendations. Recommendation 51, 52, and 53 are in particular in drinking. There's some items in there, recommendations for drinking water. And drinking water and source water protection, and looking at droughts and the impact of droughts and drinking water quality. We're very lucky to announce that we have applied and received the CDC BRACE grant. BRACE is building resiliency against climate effects. We have been looking forward to receiving some funding so that we could start a program within the Department of Public Health to focus on climate change and public health, and now we're able to move that forward. So with implementation of the work under BRACE, working with CDC, we're very pleased to be able to do that, to start to work on our recommendations that are found within the GC3 report. And our emphasis will be on public health and health equity, with integrating the social vulnerability index and having a better understanding of how that works, and health equity. Our commissioner, to my deputy commissioner, my boss, Heather Aaron, we work and work to emphasize health equity. Health equity to us in the health world, within the, our department has an accreditation, which we're very, very proud of. And under that accreditation, a big part of it is our state health improvement plan. Within that, we emphasize health equity, and health equity is attainment of the highest level of health for all people, no matter who you are, where you live, but attain the highest level of health. We have to better understand health disparities and social determinants of health, and make sure that within everything we have to do within drinking water or climate change, that we have a foundational understanding of that and make sure we fully implement. So next slide. Thank you. So I mentioned the State Water Plan as the umbrella plan. It really is. It is the driving force of everything that we should be doing with water. And Denise also mentioned it. There was an emphasis on a number of things. We have to have a platform for consistent, informed decision-making, and this plan is that. It basically said, for drinking water purposes, we should maintain the highest water quality. We need to balance all of the needs. And how do you do that? You do it through conservation. You do not waste the beautiful water that we have for drinking water, that we work so hard to protect through source water protection, that we work so hard to treat with treatment systems, and we work so hard to distribute to people through making sure we have operators and distribution operators and treatment operators who are operating these systems appropriately and taking tests and making sure we understand the water quality. We should not waste that water. And to always back it up with having good information to share with people so that we can make good informed decisions. Okay. Next slide. So we have learned that we have enough water, but it's not always where it needs to be. And a big piece of that is being wise with our use and having efficient use of our water supply. We know in our study within the State Water Plan, there is a very large chapter on climate change and the stress on our natural systems. We don't yet know, and the idea of what's in the State Water Plan has made it into the GC3. The issue of the stress of climate change on our drinking water supplies, whether it's quality and quantity, is really yet unknown. We need to make sure the issues of bacteria growth, cyanobacteria, other issues that we have yet, that we see in other states across our country that we have really yet to see here. And there might be a little instance here or there, but we have to pay close attention to the stress of climate change on our drinking water supplies. And now's the time to implement the plan's priority action items. So next slide, please. So my call to action is to always think about protecting our state's drinking water sources and our systems. The system is also very important to never forget about, because it impacts the drinking water quality as well. Implement the state water plan along with the GC3, the drought plan, the WUC plan, which I didn't mention much about, but it looks at specifically at water supply planning for the short term and long term, and the PFAS action plan from the governor's task force a couple of years ago. Make sure they're all consistent and working together under the umbrella of the state water plan. Emphasize and integrate, have a good understanding of health equity and the social vulnerability index and how those can work together with environmental justice, and make sure that we're all looking in the same direction and working together. Emphasize and never forget, this is about safe drinking water and public health protection, and that we are really here to protect and assist the most vulnerable of our populations. It is so very important never to forget that. And that is something that I've had a discussion with my new Commissioner Jatani about. The most vulnerable deserve our attention. And emphasize water quality, source water protection, and water conservation and efficiency together. Do not forget why you are conserving that source. Let's not think about just conservation on its own, because I think people need to understand that the source that you're conserving means that if you conserve and water irrigation, for instance, Denise and I talk about this a lot. You don't need to irrigate your grass every day. You could do it just twice a week, and you could conserve so much of that water supply, so much energy, so much of the cost of moving that water, and so much of that beautiful raw water that we have, and so much on treatment costs. For the future, these need to be thought of together to emphasize, understand the Safe Drinking Water Act and all of its laws, and how important it is to make sure that for the future, water is also affordable. If we work together on efficiency and conservation, and we understand the underpinnings of quality and protecting the sources of water, we can make sure for the future, moving forward for the next generations, that water is plentiful and affordable at the same time. So I look forward to working with all of you on this call for action, and to work together on understanding and any future actions in protecting the public health. Brenda, thank you.
Thank you, Lori. There is a lot there, and there are a number of questions in the chat, but in the interest of time, I'm going to reserve those questions for the entire panel after Brian's presentation. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce Brian at this point. Brian, who I consider to be a friend, who also the Green Bank moved across the way from us, so we're on the same campus. And every time I think I'm early and I'm going to beat him here, he's already here. I mean, I arrived this morning at about 6 something, and his car was already here. And it's like, darn you, Brian. Will I ever beat you to the office? Brian is the president and CEO of the Connecticut Green Bank, the nation's first green bank that works to confront climate change and provide all of society a healthier and more prosperous future by increasing and accelerating the flow of private capital into markets that energize the green economy. What Brian is going to talk with us today about is the Green Bank's emphasis on environmental investment And, we're very excited to have you here, Brian. And we're going to go ahead and bring up your slides and allow you to take it away.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Brenda. Happy Energy Efficiency Day, everyone. I wanted to actually say Happy We Day, given the topic of this panel. But no, thank you, Brenda, for having me. It's great to follow Denise and Lori. I'm like learning a lot about water. Really important, especially as we think about some new activity that we're hoped to do with the Connecticut Green Bank. Brenda, it's just great to be with you here in the Connecticut Nonprofit Center. Your team, Darlene, Gannon, Tanya, and the rest of Operation Fuel, it's great. It's like we're a family, like right in this neighborhood. So rise and shine every day. We know the mission. We're all after it. So that's great. And, I was walking around the office earlier today and people are coming back to work. I just wanted to say to folks out there, everyone continue to be safe. You know what you have to do. And it's just great to see people back in the office and interacting and engaging with each other so that we can advance our mission here in the state, continue to advance it. Why don't we go to the next slide? I wanted to, for the audience, a little bit just introduce the Connecticut Green Bank. And I really liked Denise's slide on a B Corp. So the Connecticut Green Bank, we're a quasi-public organization. We were created by an act of legislation 10 years ago, Public Act 1180. And a quasi-public in the context of a B Corp, you could think of us as like a B government, right? So we're kind of all about the benefit. We're all about social and environmental benefit, not financial benefit. We use private sector disciplines to achieve public sector goals. So you can kind of think of us as like a business operation, but we're really government minded. We're like social, environmental, profit minded, not financial minded. We focus on financing the deployment of clean energy. By statute, that definition is really clear in terms of what clean energy means. We all have a general sense: renewable energy, energy efficiency. It also includes alternative fuel vehicles and associated infrastructure. And just this past July, through the leadership of Governor Lamont and the Connecticut General Assembly, on a bipartisan basis, we now have an expanded scope that includes environmental infrastructure. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. What we do is we take a little bit of public revenues and we turn that revenues into mobilizing and attracting multiples of private investment. I'll talk about that in a second. We're supported by several sources of public revenues. On the clean energy side, we're supported by a system benefit fund. It's called the Clean Energy Fund. It comes to about $7 to $10 per family per year. That aggregates to $25 million that we turn into nearly $300 million of investment a year. So our goal is to take a little bit of public and turn it into a lot of private investment into our green economy. We also receive 23% of the RGGI allowance proceeds. So we invest those in renewable energy projects, specifically helping nonprofits, businesses reduce the burden of energy costs through our commercial property assessed clean energy program. As this slide states, our mission is to confront climate change. But in doing that, as we've heard from the prior speakers, we also realize a lot of additional benefits. We create jobs in our communities. We reduce the burden of energy costs on our families and businesses, and we improve public health, right? Cleaner air translates into better public health. So we get all those things when we help mobilize private investment into clean energy and confronting climate. But we're guided by a larger vision. So, we think our vision statement is a planet protected by the love of humanity. When you think about our environmental problems, we are not going to be able to confront climate change unless we're able to work with each other and look at each other in the eye and care for each other. So this is very much a love vision, a love organization at its heart. And, several of my team I see are on the meeting today. We are very passionate about what we do. It may be the inputs and the outputs that we're focused on in terms of our business model, but at the end of the day, we're about making people's lives better. And I'll talk about our environmental justice activities in a second. Let's go to the next slide. I like this slide a lot. It's kind of like a high level representation of what a green bank is. So we try to take a little bit of public funding and use it in such a way that it attracts multiples of private investment into our economy. So you all know out there, like our legislators, our governor are very ambitious. They've got great public policies, RPS policies, climate change policies. I'm learning about water, learning more about open space policies. They've put those policies out there. And success is achieving, realizing those policies. So our goal is really, as an intermediary between the public policy and the market, is to translate that policy to the market and say, you know what, our legislative leaders, our political leaders want to see A, B, and C achieved. We want to attract your investment into Connecticut's economy so that you can help us achieve those objectives. And in a number of different ways, we use our resources to get them to invest that private investment to support our policy objectives. So that's kind of what a green bank does. And then at the end of the day, when that happens, you get all the social and environmental benefits that we're after. Jobs, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, you all know them. But it all really starts with investment in an economy that helps lead and drive those social and environmental impacts. Let's go to the next slide. We're celebrating our 10th anniversary. So July of 2011 was when Public Act 1180 passed, and we just passed that date. So we're here at 10 years. We've invested nearly $300 million of public resources to mobilize $1.9 billion of private investment in Connecticut's green economy. So $2.2 billion over the last decade. Again, what comes from that investment are a lot of different things. We try to use a limited amount of public to mobilize multiples of private. So we've got a leverage ratio of 7 private dollars to every 1 public dollar. And we also don't give the money away. We loan it out. So we expect it to come back. So that's a real important distinction of green banks. And that's important because as you build a strong financial position as an organization, what we could then do is use that strong financial position to attract private investors into supporting our policy objectives. We've helped deploy nearly a half a gigawatt of behind the meter renewable energy in our state, including energy efficiency, helped reduce energy consumption. That's helped create over 25,000 jobs in our communities, direct, indirect, and induced jobs by reducing the energy burden on families and businesses. Our families pay a significant portion of their household income on energy. Specifically, those vulnerable communities can spend 10, 15, 20% of their household income on energy. That is completely unnecessary. We can help them through energy efficiency and renewable energy, reduce that energy burden and completely eliminate the energy affordability gap. That investment also creates tax revenues for the state. So we've helped create over $100 million of tax revenue going back to the state of Connecticut to use to, again, advance its investments in making people's lives better through policy. And we help avoid over 10 million metric tons of CO2 emissions that cause climate change over the life of these measures. We also know that as we clean the air, we improve public health. Lori was speaking about that earlier. Cleaner air results in less hospitalizations, less sick days, less deaths, and you can put a value in terms of that public health savings. So it results in that. But with all this impact, it's also important to point out that we need to ensure that we are enabling more public and private investment in vulnerable communities throughout our state. Each state has its definition of vulnerable communities. In Connecticut, as a result of Public Act 20-05 last fall, the colloquial Take Back Our Grid Act actually created this definition of vulnerable communities, which includes low to moderate income families. It includes Community Reinvestment Act eligible communities, which are essentially less than 80% area median income census tract communities. It includes environmental justice communities, Connecticut General Statutes 22A-20A. I saw Representative Reyes on here earlier. That includes a couple of things. DECD determined distress communities, federal poverty level less than 200% of federal poverty level communities. So vulnerable communities has a definition in the state of Connecticut. It also includes an opportunity for deep working with stakeholders to further define that definition. So put that out there for folks out there who are thinking about how can we continue to improve that policy decision. That is also out there. Connecticut is known as a solar with justice state, which essentially means that low to moderate income families are demanding solar PV on par in comparison to non-low to moderate income families. And communities of color, specifically Hispanic, Black families, are demanding solar PV more than white families. So Connecticut is a solar with justice state. You know, not only are we the best in the Northeast in terms of watts per capita deployed in residential solar, but we've also got the unique distinction of a few in this country of being a solar with justice state. I would just add that I think a comment Denise made about DG and getting the utilities involved is I'm optimistic as Connecticut transitions its net metering policy to a tariff-based policy that the utilities are going to step up starting January 1st of 2022. The Public Utilities Regulatory Authority, also known as PURA, Chair Gillette has done an extraordinary job translating the public policy of the General Assembly when it comes to the tariff, as well as battery storage, to ensuring that vulnerable communities are front and center in terms of the prioritization of those programs. So I'm optimistic we're going to continue to see energy burden be eliminated by low to moderate income families, vulnerable communities participating in those programs. Let's go to the next slide. So I wanted to transition a bit to environmental infrastructure. And as was talked about earlier, the Governor's Council on Climate Change has a working group called the Funding and Financing Adaptation and Resiliency Working Group. And they issued 6 recommendations that were part of the Governor's Council on Climate Change report that came out late last year. One of them was to expand the scope of the Green Bank beyond clean energy to support resilience and adaptation and other environmental infrastructure. As well as ensuring that those funding and financing programs are delivering no less than 40% of that investment in benefits in vulnerable communities. So those recommendations were prescient, and I think the subsequent leadership of the governor with the support, the bipartisan support of the Connecticut General Assembly in the passage of Public Act-115 is really exciting because now we have another tool. So this part of the act expands the Green Bank to include all of these areas that you're seeing on the screen as environmental infrastructure. Because our mission is to confront climate change, resilience and adaptation will be cross-cutting. And because vulnerable communities are a priority, that will be a cross-cutting issue across all of these areas of environmental infrastructure. I'm not going to go into the land use areas, but I will talk a little bit about water to the extent I can, but I'm happy to talk about the process that we're going through. Let's see, the policy also creates an environmental infrastructure fund. So I mentioned earlier that the Green Bank administers a clean energy fund. It actually now creates an environmental infrastructure fund, doesn't have resources in it, but we are working very hard to ensure that federal resources through possibly reconciliation, something to look at are the National Climate Bank, something called the Clean Energy and Sustainability Accelerator, modeling Connecticut's Green Bank at a national level to create state and local green banks. So what you want to follow in reconciliation is something called the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. That is essentially a $27.5 billion federal source of revenue that would go down to state and local green banks to support these types of activities. We now have to report to the Environment and Banks Committee as a result of this expansion. We're happy to do that. One of the other interesting things about this statute, we do have the ability to issue bonds. It's allowing us to issue bonds for up to 50 years for environmental infrastructure projects. So when you think about that, that is a really significant, powerful public policy tool to be able to think about projects with useful lives of 50 years. So we're delving further into understanding what that means and what's the potential of that to advance environmental infrastructure investments. Okay, so on water, beyond what we've heard here in terms of the state drinking water, the clean water revolving funds, and everything else that's going on. We're trying to understand what we can do in addition to help support the overall water plan. It's been fun diving into that 600-page plan, as well as the green plan. We're diving into all these different plans. Let's go to the next slide, Brenda. I want to give a few examples of how, through our clean energy lens, we've been involved with water from a clean energy perspective. So one is run-of-the-river hydro. You know, it'll be interesting to understand what our water infrastructure looks like in terms of old and aging dams, those that can potentially be repowered, those that can be torn down. You know, what is the plan for dams in the state? And to the extent we can identify opportunities to invest in that infrastructure, modernize that infrastructure to maximize all the benefits that we've heard about the plans here. Maybe we can play a role with that. This is a project in Meriden where actually the town is purchasing the power from this 200 kW small run-of-the-river hydro project. It's effectively stabilized their energy prices for 30 years, and they're receiving credits through a virtual net metering program, as well as renewable energy credits from a zero emission renewable energy credit program. But this is an interesting project because it really got us to not only look at a technology that's commercially available and being deployed throughout Europe, but to also work with our local financial institutions to get them comfortable with lending and investing in the deployment of this type of infrastructure. So Webster Bank providing working capital to the developers, Key Bank construction financing for the developers, then ultimately selling the project to the Bank of America through a green bond issuance. So we were able to touch a lot of different local, regional, national banks here through this project, and maybe there are other opportunities like this if we look at the Connecticut watershed to realize potential here. Let's go to the next slide. The next slide is an example of how we work with our local community banks and credit unions. So the big plan that we live by in energy is the comprehensive energy strategy. And several years ago, the commissioner said, you know, Green Bank, you all need to figure out a way of providing loans to families to help us achieve our comprehensive energy strategy. We need low interest loans that are long-term loans that can go 12, 15, 20 years in terms. Well, we ended up providing a loss guarantee to our local community banks and credit unions, 13 of them, where we essentially say, we will take 7.5% of your losses, but you're going to take the first 1.5% of losses. And what we know is that based on the data we've seen across the country, that people pay their energy loans. You typically see less than 1% default rates. So over the course of the SMARTY program, we've had over 5,000 homes participate. Over $100 million of unsecured loans provided through community banks and credit unions to homeowners. And we've only had to pay knock on wood, we've only had to pay $75,000 in losses. So this is an example for how we're teaching the private sector, in this case, the local banking community, how to invest in clean energy's policies so that we can be smart with our money and focus it on other areas that need the public resources. You can imagine that this product would be useful for all the environmental infrastructure areas. So we're going through now a process of thinking about how could this support new water pipes in homes? How could this support greenhouses? You know, you name it, like whatever the environmental infrastructure definition is by statute, how can we operationalize that in terms of our local community banks and credit unions providing capital to families to support those various items. Let's go to the next slide. I think this is my last slide. This one. So for those of you who've been following us, we've been building our green bond engine for the last 2 to 3 years. In honor of the 50th anniversary of Earth Day last year, we developed the Green Liberty Bond. The Green Liberty Bond is essentially a green bond, but it has 3 elements to it. Anyone can issue a Green Liberty Bond as long as it has these 3 components. The first is that the use of proceeds have to go towards advancing the goals of the Paris Agreement. So that is mitigating greenhouse gas emissions or becoming more resilient to the impacts of climate change. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that the denomination value of those bonds can't be more than $1,000. Typically, bonds are sold at the $5,000 level, and they're sold in hundreds of thousands of dollars to institutional investors, pension funds. So the denomination value has to be no more than 1,000, and we're striving towards 100. Stay tuned. I think in the coming months, we're going to have something that's going to come out at $100. And then thirdly is because we want citizens to invest through bonds into their green economies, those bonds have to be independently certified and verified. So we have them Climate Bond Initiative certified. So if you do those three things, anyone across the country can issue a green bond and call it a Green Liberty Bond. We ended up winning the bond buyer. This was kind of our first foray into the bond markets, and we won one of the big awards coming out with this structure because it was modeled after the war bonds of the 1940s, which really got 85 million Americans, literally more than half the country, to put $185 billion into the federal government to help fight for our democracy in the world. So we used that model, created the Green Liberty Bond. And what you're seeing here is research that we've been doing. So every year we look at from a national level, a Connecticut level, and then some customers those solar PV customers that we help support, if they had the opportunity to invest in environmental bonds, what would they want to see their resources go towards? So here we are in a water efficiency panel, and the number one area of interest from Connecticut citizens would be in water. They overwhelmingly want to invest in their water infrastructure. You can see those solar customers there, right there, rooftop solar. It's kind of a natural, and they continue on the energy band if you follow the green line there. But Connecticut citizens broadly want to support the state with its water infrastructure. So the more things Lori does, the better people will want to invest in it. And I can say the Treasurer's Office has been extraordinary here, providing those opportunities to retail investors to invest in water. So I think I've got one last slide, and just to kind of wrap it up here, this is a bit of a mantra for us: green bonds us. This is when you think about the green bank, you think about a financial institution. I've been talking a lot about green bonds. Us, we sell them to citizens across the country, but green, the environment bonds us. It unites us. So fundamentally, the environment can be an issue that brings us together as people and as citizens of this country to help improve what it means to be an American in this country. And I'm optimistic that given everything we've heard here today and all the efforts that we're all working very hard towards, that we are going to serve and ensure our most vulnerable citizens are front and center as we build this green economy. So thank you, Brenda, for the opportunity to talk today.
Thank you so much, Brian. I just wanted to quickly share a Smarty loan story of one of our applicants who back in 2013-ish received the Smarty loan to get a lot of infrastructure work done in her home. She was a school bus driver, single mom, her parents lived with her, and she was so pleased with the end result of how her home was more efficient. She replaced her HVAC system with a more energy efficient system, and we worried about sharing the message around Smarty loans to the population that we serve, because we were concerned about the ability for folks to repay those loans back. But her story was really compelling in that she justified the loan by noting that I no longer have to pay for fuel deliveries. And at that time, fuel prices were at its peak. And so we were very pleased to hear about how the indoor air quality was a lot healthier for her and her child and her aging parents, and that she got new windows. She got the full suite of upgrades, and it was one of the most compelling stories around the Smarty loan. So I'm looking at the time. We're about 6 minutes away from our end time here, and I thought that we booked in enough time to have these conversations around energy and water efficiency, but it's clear to me that we need more time to discuss these issues, because it's critically important to our environment and to the population that needs us the most. Needs everyone that's in this webinar to think about ways in which we can better work together, and I think we are definitely moving in that direction. So Gannon, she asked in her panel a question about, what keeps you all up at night. So I want to ask Denise, Lori, and Brian, what's a moment for you in which you feel like you've had a productive day that makes you rest easy at night around these issues? I'll go ahead and start with Denise.
I think what makes me rest easy at night is when you're seeing a project all come together. A lot of times I'm working with multiple agencies, I'm working with federal agencies, and everything's falling into place. I've got one that I'm working on source water protection, that the federal government ended up coming in and bringing in dollars, and we're working on multiple state agencies, and that project is just such a delight. So that's one of the things. It's like, oh, we did that. It's like it, and now seeing the project almost come to completion. Yeah, it's good feeling. Thank you.
That's great. Lori, we had several questions in the chat directed towards you, and we'll try our best to get those questions to you, and maybe you can answer them in our post recap survey and email that we're going to send out to everyone that's registered today. So we'll get to those questions, but as we close, I wanted to ask you what helps you rest easy at night?
Well, since over the last 18 months, the one thing that has been comforting is to see the death number from COVID at 0. Mm-hmm. We haven't seen it that often, and it's still not there. And for a few days, at one point, we saw it at 0. And we hope to get there again. That's comforting, because as I think Brian mentioned, you know, it's the same with us. You see me in my home today, but we're back in the office 2 or 3 days a week now. And it's wonderful to see people again, like to see their faces, to see people I haven't seen in person for 1.5 years. It's wonderful for that. And for us to get back to semi-normal, the new normal, we call it. But we have to get beyond the people that we have over 8,600 deaths from COVID, and we can never forget the impact of that. It has changed our world. We have to learn from it and move on. With water, what brings me comfort is knowing the people that do the work every day and the people that are involved really care. We are not without fault. We all have issues, and there's all kinds of things every single day. But the people that work with drinking water 24/7, that keep the water flowing, the safe drinking water, that's what brings me comfort. And my staff, from my commissioners to the people that operate the treatment plants that do an excellent job. There are people that care, people like Denise, who really care fundamentally about doing the right thing for the right reason. So thank you.
Thank you, Lori. Brian, what helps you rest easy?
So I guess what I would say is what gives me comfort are people like Chair Gillette at Pura. You know, like the Public Act 21-53, that's an act concerning electric storage, I think is what it is. But, you know, the legislature puts something down in policy and tries to articulate the goals and objectives of policy. And here we've got a chair who takes that policy using existing regulation to structure a process that is inclusive of public comment, to design a program whose priority is vulnerable communities and reducing ratepayer rates. Like I've never seen, this is a bit of a technical comment, but I've never seen a focus so much on the ratepayer impact measure. It is a cost effectiveness test that if it's greater than 1 means that ratepayers are reducing costs, not costs are being reduced to ratepayers, not increasing. And she has made that a priority of the program, along with ensuring that vulnerable communities benefit from these programs and making sure that we are hitting those customers on the grid edge. So resilience, it's just a beautiful articulation of a policy from a legislature and interpreting that into a market opportunity. And I am really excited, like, to be working with the utilities come January 1st. Brenda, we're going to work with you on Operation Fuel side to make sure that, you know, our most vulnerable have access to these technologies, because not only can they reduce their energy costs, but they can also now become more resilient to the impacts of climate change. So that's, you know, that gives me comfort to know that there are people like Marissa who just can interpret that stuff into things that make change happen on the ground. And I'm just excited to see the future of Connecticut from that perspective.
Well, I echo everyone's comments on what helps you all rest easy at night. Here at Operation Fuel, we have a nickname for Chair Gillette. It's the notorious MPG. So we definitely echo your admiration and respect for Chair Gillette. What helps me rest easy at night is definitely working with this kick-ass team we have here at Operation Fuel. Excuse my language. But you know, everyone here shows up, you know, in a way that advances the mission in ways that I just admire so much. What keeps me up at night is definitely climate change. You know, I am worried about the future of our next round of generations and our children. But I do believe that we here in Connecticut, we're in a bit of a bubble, and that everyone is somewhat moving in the same direction. I think the pandemic helped that along. And I'm just looking forward to the future and working with all of the groups here to help continue to advance our mitigation efforts. I want to thank everyone for being with us today. I know it was a long summit, but we really wanted to give the time and space to have a fruitful discussion about these issues. Merging energy and water efficiency together. I'm hoping that we can continue this conversation at another time because there's still more to discuss. And again, I want to thank the team at Operation Fuel for helping us get through today and organizing today's event. And thanking the board of directors at Operation Fuel and all of our partners, our fuel banks. And I know I'm missing names, but please, you know, feel free to email me or tag me anytime. And thank you all for joining today.
Thank you.